The story begins beneath the towering stone walls of a majestic northern fortress. Duke Ilian stood resolute, his armor gleaming in the dim light as his troops lined the battlements behind him. Known as the unyielding master of the northern borders, he now faced a threat greater than anything he had anticipated, an endless tide of the undead, their grotesque forms cloaked in a swirling, toxic fog that spread like disease across the battlefield. One of his men, eyes wide with fear, called out to him and pointed urgently. From the heart of the enemy ranks, a lone figure emerged. It was Dorian, the undead knight. A legend drenched in dread. He was a warrior so powerful that even 10 elite knights would hesitate to face him in mortal combat. A grim-faced soldier turned to the Duke and proposed a retreat, suggesting they brace for a siege. He insisted there was no hope of victory with their current numbers. But Duke Ilian rejected the idea outright. He declared that if the city gate were to fall, the entire nation would fall with it. He emphasized that today, here and now, they must hold the line, regardless of the cost. Then, mid-sentence, the Duke faltered. His eyes widened. A blur of motion streaked across the field toward the undead ranks. A lone figure, charging with inhuman speed. The Duke stared, trying to grasp who this reckless warrior could be. Murmurs rose among the soldiers. Recognition dawned. It was Lord Urin Rox, scion of the southern Marquisate of Rox. One soldier noted that Urin fought with daggers. Another expressed disbelief, questioning how anyone, daggers or not, could hope to defeat Dorian. They muttered that it was suicide. But then, Urin struck. His daggers slashed through Dorian, and the monstrous knight's armor and flesh began to dissolve as if submerged in acid. Shock rippled through the ranks. More undead approached, but Urin moved like a phantom, his blades slicing through corpses that crumbled into melting heaps. The men could hardly believe their eyes. One of them muttered in awe, asking if Urin might be a saint sent from heaven. Another scoffed, calling the idea laughable. Urin, however, was no saint. He fought with a cold, precise purpose. Invisible to the others, glowing system messages flickered before him. They reported gained experience and a level up in the Firebone Mountain technique, a poison that ate through the very marrow of the undead. The 10,000 poisons absorption technique had also activated, devouring the surrounding miasma and fueling the progression of the 4 heavenly poison arts. To himself, Urin declared that anything useful to his body would be his to claim. 6 months earlier, Urin had awakened in a lavishly decorated room, the softness of the bed beneath him unfamiliar. Confused, he scanned his surroundings. A beautiful woman stood beside him. She asked if he had awakened, her voice calm. He stared at her, captivated by her beauty and struck by her unusual clothing and the sword at her hip. She asked about his condition, but before he could respond, she informed him that she would summon the priest immediately and exited the room before he could question her further. Left alone, Urin tried to make sense of the situation. As he turned to the mirror, what he saw stunned him. He let out a startled cry, staring at the reflection of a chubby, childlike figure where his mature, attractive body had once been. He couldn't believe it. He convinced himself it had to be a dream. Perhaps if he slept again, he'd wake up in reality. The door opened again. A man in priestly garb entered, greeting him as young master. Behind him came another figure. An older man whose commanding presence was impossible to ignore. The moment he laid eyes on Urin, his face contorted with fury. He seized Urin's hand and scolded him, calling him a disgrace and demanding to know if he had finally chosen to wake up. Urin had no idea who the man was, but his overwhelming presence was terrifying. The priest stepped in, urging the elder to wait with punishment since the young master had just regained consciousness. Reluctantly, the man backed down, persuaded by the priest's reasoning. After a brief examination, the priest reported that Urin's mental state seemed stable and his wounds were nearly healed. He expressed cautious relief. But the older man dismissed the relief with disgust. He snarled that he would have preferred Urin to remain unconscious, or dead. He then accused him of assaulting his fiancée and declared that he was a monster. He reminded him that he was already 19, that his younger brother had awakened his aura, while he, the eldest son, only grew fatter and more useless by the day. Urin, bewildered, silently questioned what an aura even was. The older man then ordered him to apologize to his fiancée the moment he could walk again. When Urin asked who she was, the man shouted that her name was Alia and warned that if she didn't forgive him, his life was finished. Cornered, Urin nodded and muttered a shaky agreement. The man ended the lecture with a final threat. He was not to bring further shame to the Rox family. At the mention of the name Urine Rocks, a chill ran through the young man's spine. He suddenly understood. He was Urine Rocks. And the furious man before him could only be one person, Marquis Wellington Rocks. Unthinkingly, he spoke the name aloud. Wellington's fury exploded. Enraged that his son dared use his first name, he struck him hard. Urine's body flew across the room and hit the ground with a thud. Servants rushed to restrain the Marquis as Urine lay stunned, barely conscious. Even as pain clouded his vision, part of him clung to the hope that this was all a dream. But then he woke again. Still dazed, he blinked at the ceiling. Another woman entered, her white hair unmistakable. She asked if he had awakened. He called her Aaron, and she confirmed her name, watching him curiously as he clutched his head in despair. He asked her if he had tried to chase Alia and was beaten unconscious. Aaron, surprised by his formal tone, said yes. Lady Alia had struck him down when he tried to assault her. Realization crashed down on him. He was doomed. The full horror of his situation settled in. He was inside the web novel he himself had written. Worse still, he hadn't become the protagonist. He had become Urine Rocks, a pathetic villain who tormented the hero and died like a fool in a back alley. He panicked, refusing to accept it. He screamed that this wasn't just a webtoon. Aaron, confused, asked what that word meant. Urine began to cry. He remembered every shameful detail he had written about Urine Rocks, lazy, talentless, arrogant, relying solely on his family's name. In the novel, he lost Alia to the hero, then tried to kill the protagonist in a fit of jealousy and died in disgrace. He wondered how he could possibly survive in this world. He had no idea what talents Urine might have. But then he remembered something crucial. He had written this story. He knew about secret opportunities and hidden treasures the protagonist hadn't discovered yet. He had to act fast. Trying to get up, he stumbled. The weight of his bloated body made movement difficult. Aaron rushed to him, asking if he was all right. He brushed her off. She urged him to rest. Suddenly, he froze. He realized something was missing, something he had expected to see. Then, as if summoned by his will, a transparent window blinked into view before him. It hovered in the air, revealing information about Aaron. Her traits: Swift Sword Level 2, Clear Mind Level 1, Aura Adaptation Level 1. And below, a bar marked, Affection. Reading 0. Aaron asked what was wrong. He told her he was just acting weird for a moment and sent her away. She nodded and left. Alone again, he summoned the window once more. The Swift Sword trait confirmed what he already knew. Aaron was naturally gifted. He then looked closer at the affection meter, wondering if it functioned like the love meters in dating sims. At least it wasn't negative, he thought. That was progress. Pushing forward, he tried to summon his own status window. It appeared instantly. Name: Urine Rocks. Special condition: Morbid obesity traits. Creator's Eye Level 1, 4 Heavenly Poison Arts, locked. Synchronization rate: 99.9%. His eyes lingered on the 4 Heavenly Poison Arts. That was from one of his favorite stories, where a heroine used poisons and hidden weapons. It didn't belong in a medieval fantasy setting, yet here it was. One trait caught his attention in particular: Tang Clan of Sichuan, locked. He pondered how such a thing existed here, and what might happen if he could unlock it. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the estate, a servant named Aaron spoke with the Marquis. The Marquis asked if Urine had awakened. Aaron confirmed that he had, though she noted that he seemed off, physically and mentally. She added that he had stumbled when he tried to stand. The Marquis was surprised. The priest had said Urine's wounds weren't serious. He then asked if Aaron had noticed anything strange. He noted that Urine, who would normally throw a tantrum when told to apologize to Alia, had accepted it quietly this time. The Marquis insisted that this calmness was only temporary, that the old Urine would return soon and seek revenge. Aaron, however, said she hoped the young master would recover and improve with time. The Marquis scoffed at Aaron's optimism, dismissing her belief in Urine with a bitter laugh. He admitted that even he, as Urine's own father, had long given up hope. With dry sarcasm, he added that he pitied her for wasting her time, and that she would have been better off living freely as a knight rather than attaching herself to someone so hopeless. Aaron said nothing in return. She simply stood in silence, the weight of her master's life hanging in her thoughts. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about the young master had changed, subtly, yet unmistakably. Meanwhile, Urine asked Aaron to take him to the training hall. He said he wanted to get some exercise. Eren, startled by the unusual request, questioned his timing. But Yuren insisted. As they walked together through the vast garden that separated the residence from the training grounds, Yuren's mind remained focused. He considered the traits revealed by his new ability. The creator's eye let him read the stats of others, but the Tang clan of Sichuan trait remained locked. He guessed that his physical condition, specifically, his morbid obesity, might be the key obstacle. Exercise, he decided, was the first step. Yet, even walking proved difficult. The sprawling palace gardens, larger than several sports fields, left him breathless. He had never felt more aware of his body's weight dragging him down. With every servant they passed, he caught glimpses of their status windows. Affinity scores flashed in harsh red. Loathing, disgust, hatred. He couldn't blame them. The original Yuren had been cruel, arrogant, and lazy. The memory of who he used to be in this world filled him with quiet disgust. After what felt like an eternity of trudging, they finally reached the third training hall, one of the less used spaces. Inside, someone else was already training. The moment Yuren's eyes landed on him, a new window appeared. Affinity. -91 desire to kill. Hi, the man's name was Rika Alian. His trait read Swift Sword, level 1. Rika offered a mocking smile and asked why Yuren had come to train. His tone dripped with sarcasm. Yuren recognized him instantly and stiffened in response. He replied that of course he remembered Rika. Turning quickly to Eren, Yuren whispered a question, asking what had happened between him and this man. Eren, surprised, asked if he genuinely didn't remember. She explained that years ago, when the Marquis had forced Yuren to begin training, Yuren, furious and defiant, summoned Rika, who was then a trainee knight, and slashed his face with a sword while laughing. After that, the Marquis stopped trying to train him. Yuren was horrified. The memory was new to him, but it confirmed what he already suspected. The original Yuren had been a complete monster. Deciding that it was better to avoid unnecessary conflict, he asked Eren if there was another training space he could use, somewhere more isolated. Eren told him about the fourth hall, located far from the main building. It was poorly equipped and mostly just an empty field. To Yuren, it sounded perfect. He said that if he was going to lose weight, he'd do it properly, and asked her to take him there. When they arrived, Yuren immediately thought about the Tang clan of Sichuan. He recalled that they were masters of throwing knives and subtle assassination. In an attempt to awaken the trait, he grabbed a dagger and hurled it with force. Nothing happened. Disappointed, he gave a strained laugh and claimed he was just throwing for fun. He figured he needed to improve his stamina first. Eren suggested he start with some light running. Yuren replied that he would train alone and told her to go ahead and focus on her own exercises. And so he began to run. Elsewhere, the Marquis stood at a window, watching in stunned silence. He could hardly believe his son had not only come to the training hall but had actually started exercising. He questioned how long such strange motivation could last. 3 weeks passed. To everyone's astonishment, Yuren didn't miss a single day of training. He pushed himself every morning and night. His weight dropped steadily, and his appearance began to change. The Marquis, upon seeing him, remarked that such determination was only fitting of his son. He studied Yuren closely. Without the layers of fat, his son had become handsome. For the first time in years, the Marquis wondered if his son was finally maturing. In his room, Yuren stood before the mirror, examining the changes in his body. His progress was undeniable. Yet the Tang clan of Sichuan trait remained locked. He decided to give himself 1 more month. If that didn't work, he would have no choice but to steal the protagonist's fated encounter. Just then, Eren entered with his evening meal. A system window appeared the moment the lid came off the bowl. Sharon's soup. A traditional Rox family dish that promotes fat burning and muscle growth. Customarily eaten after training. Yuren scowled at the familiar sight. Eren noticed and asked if he was tired of it. He admitted that eating the same soup for 3 weeks straight had worn him down. Eren's demeanor grew stern. She asked him whether his goal was simply to slim down or to become a knight. Yuren answered with enthusiasm, declaring that he intended to become a knight. Eren scolded him, reminding him that even the Marquis himself consumed Sharon's soup after every training session. As the heir of the Rox family, he had no right to complain. Yuren muttered in agreement and began eating, telling himself that the tradition was outdated, but worth enduring if it helped him transform. Midway through the meal, he paused. The taste was different. Before he could question it further, a system message flashed. Warning. Poison ingested. He froze, but almost instantly, another message followed. Condition met. Tang clan of Sichuan unlocked. Stunned, he stared at the screen. He hadn't expected this. Unlocking the trait through poisoned food. It made sense in a twisted way. He had just stepped into the legacy of an assassin clan known for thriving under poison. Elsewhere in the manor, the Marquis was still pondering his son's transformation. He found himself repeating what he had already admitted. Yurin had indeed grown handsome, but had he truly matured? A knock interrupted his thoughts. Someone asked for permission to enter, and he allowed it. His second wife, Kenna, stepped inside carrying a tray with tea. She asked what he was staring at so intently. The Marquis replied that he had simply been admiring the beauty of the garden. Kenna smiled, clearly pleased. She said that she had personally taken care of the garden, and the Marquis complimented her skill without hesitation. As the Marquis sat in quiet conversation with his wife Kenna, she shifted the topic with casual precision, asking when he intended to officially name Colin as his heir. She reminded him that he had previously promised to make the announcement by the end of the month and that, now that everything had been decided, it would be best to expedite the process. Her tone was gentle, but her words held weight. The Marquis, momentarily caught off guard, hesitated. He said that the situation might take longer than expected. Kenna frowned subtly and reminded him again of his commitment. She emphasized that he had given his word. Colin was to be declared heir this very month. The Marquis sighed and explained that recent developments had complicated things. He said that, as she had probably heard, Yurin had shown signs of a sudden awakening. As the eldest son of House Rocks, Yurin could still become a worthy successor if his current progress continued. The Marquis added that it would be foolish to overlook his efforts so quickly. Feigning warmth, Kenna agreed. She said that she, too, had heard about Yurin's change, and admitted she had been worried about him. Now, however, she claimed to be relieved by the news. She added that it must be comforting for the Marquis as well, to see his eldest son finally act with some sense. The Marquis chuckled, but his laughter was tinged with sarcasm. He said that it was amusing how a single slap from a woman could do what years of discipline couldn't. When Kenna asked again about the matter of succession, the Marquis explained that 3 weeks of training wasn't enough to base such a decision on. He said that he preferred to observe Yurin a little longer. However, he gave his word that if Yurin regressed, the title would immediately pass to their first son, Colin. Satisfied, at least on the surface, Kenna invited him to join her in the bedroom once he finished his work. She left the room with graceful composure, but once out of sight, her face darkened. The rage simmering beneath her elegant exterior surged to the surface. Her expression twisted with fury, and she silently vowed revenge on Yurin Rocks. Meanwhile, Yurin himself remained seated in his room, still processing what had just occurred. The notification from the system echoing in his mind. The Tang clan of Sichuan trait had been unlocked. He thought about how absurd it was that ingesting poison was the requirement. Then, he recalled the details listed in the Sharon Soup's system description and tried scrolling further down. There, in the extended notes, he found an update in the database, an annotation about the Han-Yang herb. It was noted as a medicinal plant with faint paralytic properties. In small doses, it was harmless to adults, but with accumulation, it could gradually lead to paralysis and, eventually, death. Erin's voice snapped him back to the present. She asked why he had stopped eating. Snapping out of his daze, Yurin resumed eating with exaggerated enthusiasm. As he chewed, his thoughts sharpened. Someone had poisoned him. But who? He remembered the plotline from his own novel. Around this time, Colin was supposed to be officially declared heir. If that was delayed because of Yurin's sudden training, then whoever had a stake in Colin's rise must have decided to act. His suspicions began to form quickly and pointedly. Another system message popped up. Condition met. Weak paralysis poison unlocked. After finishing the last spoonful of soup, Yurin smiled strangely and told Erin that the dish was so delicious it had brought him to tears. He asked her to leave him alone for a while. Erin accepted with a polite nod, wished him a good night, and exited the room. Alone again, Yurin summoned his status window. It opened with a shimmer, displaying his current condition, still overweight, mildly poisoned, with minor muscle soreness from training. His traits and synchronization rate remained visible, but now, by focusing like he would in a VR game, he realized he could pull up deeper layers of information. Focusing on the Tang clan of Sichuan trait brought up 3 subcategories: poisons, hidden weapons, and martial arts. All were still locked, but accessible. He decided to start with the poison section. A massive list appeared: weak paralysis poison, truth serum, soul-killing smoke, and more. All were locked, gated behind a leveling system. To unlock even the weakest poison, he learned, he needed to activate an internal technique. It made sense. The Tang clan's mastery depended on channeling internal energy to control poison. He backed out of the poison list and opened the martial arts tab to search for an internal cultivation method. Several were listed: dark poison arts, thunder needle arts, and 10,000 divine poisons energy. A warning flashed. Only one internal technique could be chosen. As a longtime fan of wuxia, the choice was obvious. The dark poison arts specialized in poison, the thunder needle arts leaned toward concealed weapons, but 10,000 divine poisons energy promised mastery of both. It required longer training, but it offered more versatility. He selected it without hesitation. Instantly, he felt something shift within his mind. The incantations and energy pathways of the technique embedded themselves in his consciousness like muscle memory. He stripped off his shirt, settled into a meditative pose, and began circulating the energy. For the first time, he felt the flow of qi, his body's life force, moving through his meridians. He guided it deliberately, focusing it into his dantian, the central energy node of the body. Time disappeared. Morning arrived, and he hadn't slept at all. Yet, he felt no fatigue. In fact, he felt invigorated, his limbs brimming with energy. He could even sense the life around him. He could count the birds outside his window by sensing their energy alone. He discovered that by directing qi to his head, he could now summon the system interface without a mirror. His progress showed 10,000 divine poisons energy, level 1, 10%. He sensed a familiar aura approaching. The door opened. Erin stepped in to wake him and noticed the untouched bed. She commented that he hadn't slept. Yurin confirmed it. She urged him to rest and skip training, but Yurin refused. He insisted that he felt excellent and couldn't afford to waste time. Erin, reluctant but understanding, agreed to prepare breakfast before his session. As she closed the door, she paused and wondered aloud when the young master had begun developing muscle. Later that morning, Yurin stood at the training field, holding a dagger. As he took aim, a crosshair flickered into view before his eyes. Just like in a first-person shooter game. He grinned and threw the dagger. It struck dead center. Erin, who had been watching, stared in surprise. A system window appeared. Hidden weapons trait unlocked. She asked what he had just done. Yurin, feigning ignorance, said he didn't know, that maybe it was the result of a month of training. He glanced at her and noticed something new. She was flustered. It was the first time he'd seen her genuinely surprised. Deciding to test his limits, he drew another dagger. As he threw, he felt a surge of internal energy, fiery and precise, rising from his core. The blade rocketed through the air, struck the center of the target, and shattered it completely. Erin gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Emboldened, Yurin turned to her. He asked if she could sense anything strange coming from him. Erin shook her head. She said there was nothing unusual, only that his weight loss since yesterday was dramatic. She added that while his steady progress had been visible, today's change was especially striking. Yurin realized then that Erin couldn't detect qi. No one could. Internal energy was unique to him in this world. He understood what that meant. He possessed a power no one else had access to, a secret weapon. With a smile, he picked up another dagger and threw it again, this time, splitting the first blade still stuck in the target. Erin, stunned, asked if she could try. He agreed. She threw a dagger. It missed completely. Yurin laughed, remarking that he had finally found something she wasn't good at. Erin frowned, clearly annoyed. At that moment, a system window appeared before Yurin, glowing faintly in the air. It announced the completion of the memory of Sachendunga and the unlocking of a new skill, Straight Strike. The description explained that this ability enhanced the force and speed of his throws, not just with familiar weapons, but with anything from stones to wooden sticks to iron swords. Anything he held could become, momentarily, a weapon of deadly precision. As Erin remained puzzled by her failed attempt with the dagger, Yurin silently picked up a broken wooden sword from the rack nearby. Without a word, he asked her to take a few steps back. Erin, surprised by the request and even more confused by the object in his hand, watched warily, not knowing what he intended. Yurin felt a surge of internal energy rush from his dantian, coursing through his arms and into the blade. He hurled the broken sword with precision. It shot forward like a cannonball. piercing the center of the target with a crack and shattering the wooden frame completely. Erin stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. She screamed out in shock, demanding to know what kind of power she had just witnessed. Urien shrugged, masking his triumph with false modesty. He said perhaps it was just the power of good practice. Erin immediately rejected the explanation. She insisted that what she had seen defied everything she knew. No amount of training could produce such destructive force from a broken wooden sword. Then, with a shift in tone, Urien addressed her seriously. He said that he was well aware she reported everything he did to the Marquis. The sudden admission caught Erin off guard. She didn't deny it. Urien, however, didn't scold her. Instead, he asked for a favor. That she keep what she just saw a secret for the time being. He explained that he was currently conducting personal experiments, and promised to reveal everything to her in due time. He simply asked for patience. Erin hesitated, then nodded in agreement. Later that evening, Urien observed one of the palace chefs, Pero, leaving the kitchen. Activating the creator's eye, Urien examined him. A status window appeared. Poisonous touch, level 1, agile movement, level 1, and affinity, neutral. That was all he needed to confirm his suspicion. The trait poisonous touch explained how the poison had ended up in his food. Urien narrowed his eyes. This was the man who had tried to kill him. Now it was time for a real test. Focusing his energy, Urien activated the weak paralysis poison skill from a distance. The result was instant. Pero's body went rigid mid-step and collapsed onto the cobblestone pathway, unmoving. A new system window appeared above him, displaying a timer. Paralysis duration 1 hour. Urien approached calmly, lifting the chef's frozen body over his shoulder. He carried him to a quiet alley behind the palace grounds. As Pero began to regain some movement in his eyes, Urien knelt beside him and began to speak. He asked if Pero understood who he was and threatened him plainly, stating that if he wanted to live, he would answer everything truthfully. Since Pero couldn't speak yet, Urien introduced a simple method. Blink once for yes, twice for no. Pero blinked once to show understanding. Urien's first question came sharp and direct. Was he the one who had poisoned the soup? One blink. Yes. He followed with another. Was the poison used the Han-Yang herb? Again, one blink. Yes. Then came the question that mattered most. Was it Marchioness Kana who had ordered the poisoning? This time, Pero blinked twice. No. Urien's gaze narrowed. He warned Pero that lying would cost him his life, claiming he could tell when someone wasn't being truthful. He repeated the question, more forcefully this time. Was it Kana? Pero hesitated for a moment, but again blinked twice. No. This time, Urien believed him. He saw no fear in Pero's eyes, no hesitation that hinted at deceit. The answer felt honest. If Kana wasn't behind it, then someone else was pulling the strings. Urien decided not to press further, yet. He pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth and forced it into Pero's mouth. He then told him that what he had just ingested was a rare form of paralysis poison, one that would slowly liquefy his organs within a month if left untreated. Urien said he alone possessed the antidote and warned Pero that if he didn't obey every order, he would suffer a slow and agonizing death. When Urien asked if he understood, Pero blinked once, wide-eyed with terror. Satisfied, Urien placed a hand on Pero's forehead and released the poison's grip. Pero gasped as movement returned to his limbs. Now able to speak, Urien asked him one final time, who gave the order? Pero answered. The name came out with difficulty, Knight Commander Karax Levington. Urien immediately recognized it. Karax was Kana's older brother, a man who had risen to power only due to her influence and marriage to the Marquis. Pero explained that Karax had given him the order to kill Urien within the year, under the pretense of illness. Urien's suspicions were confirmed. Kana might not have issued the command directly, but her hand was still present. Karax was acting as her proxy. Still, Urien pushed the revelation aside for now. This wasn't the moment to strike. Instead, he handed Pero a folded sheet of parchment. It was a list, various poisons, categorized and detailed. He told Pero that with his knowledge and black market access, he would be responsible for obtaining all the items listed. He said that Karax's gold would be more than enough to fund it, and that he was to start gathering them immediately, beginning with whatever he had in stock. When Pero nervously asked why he needed so many poisons, Urien silenced him with a glare. He said that asking questions wasn't part of the deal. Pero shrank back and swore obedience. Before letting him go, Yurin gave one last command, a cruel, ironic twist. From now on, Pero was to make sure every bowl of his soup contained a dose of Hanyang herb. Pero looked horrified, his face pale with disbelief. Yurin laughed openly, amused by his own theatrical sense of control. As Pero hurried away, Yurin thought to himself how easily the cook had swallowed the bluff. The poison he'd been fed was nothing more than dried leaves. The real lesson here wasn't about fear, it was about control. Yurin looked up at the night sky and reminded himself of the urgency. He still had to master the martial arts of the Tang clan of Sichuan as fast as possible. Events were accelerating. If the world followed the plot he had written, then something terrifying was just around the corner. That night, as the moonlight bathed the stone corridors in silver, Pero returned with a cloth bundle pressed to his chest. Inside were the poisonous herbs he had on hand, ingredients he had never dared to carry so openly before. Yurin, waiting in the quiet of his room, watched the cook approach with cold calculation. As soon as the bundle was opened, a system window blinked into existence before Yurin, listing each herb and its properties in precise detail. With the creator's eye assisting him, he identified every poison with effortless confidence. Pero, visibly surprised, asked how Yurin could name such rare and obscure toxins without hesitation. Yurin, keeping up his charade, claimed that this knowledge was trivial for someone like him, though in truth, he relied entirely on the system's information. Curious, Yurin asked why Pero had even carried multiple poisons when the Hanyang herb alone should have been enough to kill him. Pero explained that the herb's effect was too slow and that the body could build resistance over time. By mixing it with yakrakpa, the potency became deadlier and more difficult to detect. Yurin immediately grasped the implication. Combining poisons wasn't just about lethality. It was about precision, control, and unpredictability. When Yurin inquired how Pero knew so much, the cook's face darkened. He revealed that at the age of 8, he had been sold to the Levington family and raised under the brutal tutelage of a poison master. There had been 20 children, he said, but only he survived. Yurin noted the restrained bitterness in his tone and realized something useful. Pero bore a deep grudge against the Levingtons. That made him not only knowledgeable, but manipulable. Pleased with the information, Yurin praised him and dismissed him for the night. Once alone, Yurin prepared for his next stage of training. Without hesitation, he took each herb and consumed it raw. As expected, a barrage of system messages flooded his vision, noting the ingestion of multiple poisons. Another message followed. The body of 10,000 divine poisons is absorbing toxic compounds. But then a warning flashed across the window. Danger. Poison threshold exceeded. Immediate breathing meditation required. Without delay, Yurin dropped into a seated position and began deep meditation. He focused every bit of will into circulating the energy of his internal technique. His goal was clear. He had to reach the second stage of the 10,000 divine poisons energy. His survival depended on it. By the time dawn arrived, his body was still and composed. The door opened quietly, and Erin entered with the intent to wake him. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the sight before her. Yurin sat shirtless, his skin gleaming with sweat, muscles newly defined and carved with the lean strength of someone who had trained for years, not hours. She stared, speechless. At that moment, another system window appeared before Yurin. 10,000 divine poisons energy, advanced to stage 2. New martial art acquired. Little dragon step poison techniques unlocked. Venom pulse, lingering fog, bone freezing needle. Erin, baffled, asked what had happened to him, but before Yurin could respond, she gagged, covering her nose. The foul stench surrounding him made her recoil. Yurin quickly realized what it was. Just like in the novels, when internal energy surged and martial breakthroughs occurred, the body expelled impurities. He glanced down and grimaced. It was worse than he imagined. He moved to open the window, but Erin shouted for him to stop. She ordered him to head straight to the bath before the smell killed someone. Yurin raised his hands in surrender and obeyed. After washing away the stench of toxins and sweat, Yurin joined Erin again, and together they made their way to the training grounds. As they walked, he began experimenting with his new footwork. Little dragon step, a fluid and unpredictable movement style ideal for evasion in sudden bursts of speed. Each motion felt strange at first, like walking on uneven ground. Erin watched him with concern, asking if he was feeling all right. She noted that he looked like a drunk stumbling through the halls. Yurin laughed and said he was fine, waving off her concern. She remained unconvinced and asked if he really intended to visit the first training hall, pointing out that it would be crowded with knights today. Yurin nodded. He explained that he simply wanted to observe how the knights trained. As they entered the hall, heads began to turn. Whispers sparked. Some recognized Eren, the young master's attendant. But when their eyes landed on Yurin, confusion flickered across their faces. They stared at him, slimmer, taller, refined, and tried to place the face. One knight hesitantly recalled the rumors about the young master's sudden weight loss. Another gasped, putting the pieces together. Disbelief spread. Just a month ago, Yurin had been a bloated embarrassment. Now, he looked like a completely different man. They whispered about sorcery, hidden potions, divine blessings. Yurin, with his enhanced senses, heard every word. Amused, he scanned the crowd and spotted a young knight practicing with disciplined grace. The technique was familiar, textbook Rock's family sword stances. Eren leaned in and confirmed that what the knight was practicing was the foundational form taught to all knights of the household. She advised Yurin to watch closely. And then he realized who the knight was, Cried, one of the main characters in the novel he had written. In the original story, Cried would go on to become a loyal ally of the protagonist. Yurin hadn't described Cried's early days in the story, so it surprised him to find him already here, training diligently. He made a mental note, Cried might prove valuable later. Turning back to the rest of the knights, Yurin activated Creator's Eye. Their affinity ratings flashed before him. Hostility, disgust, contempt, and even one with murderous intent. Perfect, he thought. A testing ground. He decided to try out lingering poison, a slow-acting toxin that spread through the lungs before attacking the organs. He chose one of the knights at random and activated the skill, directing a subtle flow of energy toward the man. Moments later, the knight dropped to his knees, clutching his chest in agony. Panic spread. His comrades rushed to him, some shouting for a priest. He writhed in pain for seconds that felt like minutes, then suddenly stood, perfectly fine. The pain had vanished. Confused and angry, the others accused him of faking it. Some mocked him. Others scolded him for causing a scene. The afflicted knight couldn't explain what had just happened. Yurin, watching from a distance, smiled to himself. The poison had worked, and more importantly, it had passed undetected. After the success of his first test, Yurin decided it was time to push further. He selected a more complex and volatile poison from his newly unlocked arsenal: soul-killing smoke. This particular poison induced intense hallucinations within a targeted range, causing disorientation, fear, and in some cases, full psychological collapse. With the knights still bickering and unaware of his intent, he activated the technique. Almost immediately, one of the knights jerked backward, eyes wide in panic. He screamed that a monster was attacking him. The others turned, confused, until the illusion took hold across the group. One by one, they began to shout and recoil in terror. Eren watched from the side, bewildered. She couldn't understand what had triggered the sudden chaos. The knights stumbled, fell, and flailed across the training ground, some swinging their swords at invisible enemies, others backing into walls or curling up on the ground. Each one saw something different: savage beasts, demons, walking skeletons. And each of them was utterly consumed by fear. For several moments, the training ground descended into madness. Eventually, the poison's effect began to fade. The knights blinked, looked around, and realized that nothing was there. Confusion swept through them. They glanced at one another, breathing hard, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Yurin, watching from a distance, determined that pushing the test any further might provoke actual injury, or worse. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The poison had worked flawlessly. Turning to Eren, he said the area had become too chaotic for proper training. He suggested they leave and head instead to the fourth training hall. She agreed, though she remained distracted by the bizarre scene they were leaving behind. As they made their way through the palace grounds, a maid called out to Yurin and informed him that he had a visitor. She announced that Lady Ilia Marcus had come to see him. Inside the guest room, Ilia sat waiting, her resolve firm. She had come today to end the engagement once and for all. She had tolerated too much, and the incident that had led her to strike Yurin weeks ago had been the final straw. Yurin, aware of who was waiting, braced himself. He recalled that in the original story, this was the point when Ilia Marcus began to demand the annulment of their engagement. The original Yurin had selfishly refused, dragging the situation out, Urine sighed. He had no intention of repeating that mistake. When he entered the room, Ilya looked up, and froze. The man standing before her wasn't the spoiled, bloated noble she had known. He was lean, composed, and disturbingly calm. She didn't even recognize him. She asked who he was, genuinely confused. Urine answered that it was him, Urine Rocks. Her confusion deepened. She mentioned the rumor she'd heard, that he had lost weight through training, but admitted she dismissed it as nonsense. What she saw now didn't seem possible. How could he have changed so drastically in such a short time? Urine responded plainly. He said he had trained hard, and that after she struck him, he had reflected on himself and realized the need to change. Ilya eyed him warily, questioning his intentions. She wondered aloud if he was planning some form of revenge, if this sudden humility was a trap. Urine denied it without hesitation. Then, unexpectedly, he dropped to one knee and thanked her. He said it was because of her that he had come to his senses. He apologized deeply for his past behavior. He acknowledged her right to sever the engagement if she wished, and said he would accept her decision. Stunned, Ilya asked again who he really was. Urine answered without flinching, Urine Rocks, the former scoundrel. His apology was genuine, and for a moment, she was at a loss. Urine, watching her reaction, thought quietly to himself that the incident hadn't truly been his fault, but that of the body's previous occupant. Still, he had a reason for asking forgiveness beyond guilt. He activated Creator's Eye and brought up her status window. Traits: Kingdom Toppling Beauty, Sword Queen. Preference level: -16, Hatred. The data told him everything. Ilya wasn't just another noble daughter, Sword Queen was a trait of immense power. It guaranteed that she would grow stronger over time, surpassing her peers, and in the story, she eventually saved the protagonist during his darkest moment. She also personally defeated one of the main antagonists. Urine concluded that even if they ended their engagement, earning her favor was crucial. An ally like her could shift the tides of fate. Ilya ordered him to stand, asking if he truly meant what he said. Urine confirmed with unwavering conviction. She demanded he swear an oath, one with real weight. As her aura flared and pressed down on him, Urine recognized the moment. This was the same scene she had with the protagonist in the original story. Not him. He smiled internally and activated the 10,000 divine poisons energy. The pressure of her aura washed over him and vanished, completely repelled. Ilya's eyes widened. She had never experienced her aura failing before. Urine seized the moment and solemnly swore never to return to his old ways. After a long pause, Ilya finally relented. Her voice softened slightly as she said she would be watching him closely from now on. One mistake, she warned, and the engagement would be over for good. Then, without another word, she turned and left. Urine stood there in quiet amazement. She hadn't broken off the engagement. That, more than anything, surprised him. Outside the room, Ilya encountered the Marquis. He asked if she had come to a decision about the engagement. She responded that she had. She would not break it off. The Marquis, clearly caught off guard, asked her why. Ilya paused, seeming unsure herself. She said that she had heard rumors about Urine's change and came to see for herself. At first, she thought maybe he'd simply reverted to the quiet, soft-hearted boy he'd been in childhood. But the man she met today wasn't the child she remembered. He was someone new, someone stronger. And for now, she said, she would trust that man. The Marquis asked if she was certain. Ilya, her expression unreadable, said that she was. Ilya's voice carried sharp steel as she added that if Urine ever reverted to being the disgrace he once was, she would personally beat him to death with her own hands. The Marquis, rather than offended, burst into hearty laughter. He said that he admired her fiery nature and asked her to take good care of Urine, as only someone like her could keep him in line. She declined his invitation to stay a few more days at the estate, explaining that she had told her father she was coming to break off the engagement. Remaining any longer would raise questions. The Marquis urged her to see Urine before she left, but she refused again, saying that he was likely training, and she had no intention of disturbing him. Later that day, the Marquis summoned Urine to his office. When Urine entered, his father pretended not to recognize him, joking about the stranger in front of him. For a moment, Urine panicked, thinking perhaps the Marquis had uncovered the truth about his identity. But the Marquis then laughed and told him how proud he was of the discipline and effort his son had shown recently. He then asked if Yurin knew why he had been summoned. Yurin answered confidently, saying he believed it was time to begin his formal training as a knight. The Marquis nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness, and said that indeed, it was time to teach him the swordsmanship of the Rock's family. However, Yurin had another idea. He said there was something else he wanted to pursue. When he told the Marquis he preferred to learn the art of throwing weapons instead of traditional swordplay, the room froze. The Marquis stared at him in disbelief before scoffing, calling such techniques disgraceful tricks used by thieves and rogues. He added that throwing a dagger was worthless, useless against a knight's armor and even less effective against the scales of a creature like a burek. But Yurin pressed the matter, proposing a wager. If he could hunt a burek using only a dagger, the Marquis would train him personally. The Marquis, irritated by what he called childish defiance, insisted that no amount of training could allow someone to pierce a burek's scales without aura. Even with 100 years of practice, he claimed, it would be impossible. Yurin pointed out that if the Marquis was so certain of his inevitable failure, there was no reason to refuse the bet. Amused by what he believed would be a valuable lesson in humility, the Marquis finally agreed. The terms were set. If Yurin succeeded, the Marquis would recognize his preferred path and train him accordingly. If he failed, he would abandon his ambitions and follow his father's will without further argument. Yurin, confident and more excited than ever, immediately began preparing. He knew how tough the burek's scales were. After all, he had ridden the creature into existence himself. That night, he planned to consume more forbidden herbs to elevate his 10,000 divine poisons energy to the 3rd star, hoping to gain the edge he needed. Later that evening, Aaron visited him with a message from the Marquis, confirming the time of the trial. Noon the next day, in the first training hall. Yurin asked her if she knew about the bet. She replied that everyone in the palace knew, and that most of them were laughing about it. She said the prevailing rumor was that Yurin would either faint or flee in terror at the sight of the monster. In their eyes, he was still the laughingstock of the estate. When he asked if people would come to watch, Aaron confirmed it. The hall would be full. The Marquis hadn't restricted attendance, and the spectacle had spread like wildfire. Yurin muttered that the whole thing had turned into some kind of twisted arena event. He asked for her opinion, and Aaron replied calmly that she believed tomorrow would be his day. That night, Yurin reached the 3rd star in his internal technique. When the day of the challenge arrived, the first training hall was packed. Servants, knights, nobles, everyone had gathered to witness the show. Yurin entered and found the crowd buzzing with anticipation. The Marquis asked if he was ready. Yurin glanced at the sea of onlookers. The Marquis, feigning innocence, claimed he had only told his personal mage, and somehow the news had spread. He warned Yurin not to embarrass the Rock's name in front of such a crowd. At that moment, a senior mage stepped forward and began the summoning ritual. Yurin watched, eyes wide. It was the first time he had seen magic performed live, and it mesmerized him. Then the ground trembled. A surge of electricity snapped through the air as dust exploded outward. A towering beast emerged from the summoning circle. The burek. The monster, roughly 150 centimeters tall, had the grotesque shape of a bloated sea creature twisted by magic. A faint aura of static crackled around its body. The crowd recoiled in horror. Yurin, however, watched it with a strange mix of curiosity and nostalgia. He recalled creating the burek on a whim, while eating sashimi at a cheap restaurant and struggling to meet a publishing deadline. Without its limbs, it might have even looked cute. Without warning, the burek lunged. The spectators screamed, but the Marquis raised his hand and ordered the knights not to interfere. Yurin cursed under his breath, annoyed that no one had warned him the beast would attack the moment it was summoned. Still, the creature's movements weren't particularly fast. Yurin took a steady breath, analyzing its scale patterns. The moment he focused, a crosshair appeared in his vision, his internal energy reacting, locking onto the beast's weak point. He threw the dagger with perfect precision. The blade whistled through the air and struck directly beneath the burek's arm, an exposed, scale-less joint. The monster let out a shriek and collapsed. Dead. Silence blanketed the hall. A heartbeat passed, and then the crowd erupted in cheers. They shouted Yurin's name, praised the impossible feat, and called it nothing short of miraculous. Yurin stood quietly, trying to process what had just happened. He had killed the beast in one hit. The Marquis was speechless. He turned to his son and demanded to know how he had done it. Urin simply said that he had aimed well and hit the right spot. The Marquis refused to believe it. He said it made no sense. A Burek couldn't die from a single dagger throw, its scales were too thick. Urin smiled slyly, raising his voice just enough for the entire crowd to hear. He reminded everyone of the terms of the bet, and that a great Marquis like his father would surely not go back on his word. The Knight Commander stepped in, trying to preserve the Marquis's pride. He explained that Urin's throw had landed in a rare unarmored gap, and that this had to be pure luck. The Marquis, clearly unsettled by what had just unfolded, insisted that the bet be redone. Urin, however, stood firm and refused. The Marquis, not one to give up easily, proposed a new condition. If Urin managed to win again, he would grant him a single wish, no matter what it was. But if he failed, he would have to submit to his original path and learn the swordsmanship of the Rock's family as planned. This time, the opponent would not be a monster like the Burek, but a knight. Urin paused only for a moment before agreeing. He recognized the opportunity immediately, especially when he spotted Knight Commander Karox Levington among the crowd. For a brief moment, he considered the idea of challenging Karox himself. Humiliating him in public would be satisfying. But Urin quickly discarded the thought. It was too soon. Karox still served as his connection to the supply of rare poisons through Pero. For now, it was smarter to leave him untouched. He turned to the Marquis and admitted that it wouldn't be fair to pit him against a full-fledged knight. He requested that the duel be held instead against a trainee knight. The Marquis, intrigued by his sudden humility, accepted. Then came the twist. Urin asked for the right to choose his opponent himself. The Marquis agreed, curious to see where this was going. Without hesitation, Urin named his choice, Cried. Cried stepped forward when summoned, offering a respectful bow. The Marquis gave him a mission, one he didn't expect. He told Cried that his task was to face Urin in a duel and, if necessary, correct his misguided path. Cried was visibly shaken by the order. He looked to the Marquis in disbelief, but the Marquis asked if he was unwilling to carry it out. Cried swallowed his hesitation and accepted. Urin, sensing the discomfort, told him not to worry, he would make it simple. He announced that he would throw only 3 daggers. If Cried could block all 3, Urin would concede defeat. The declaration sent a ripple through the crowd. The Marquis was visibly irritated, interpreting it as arrogance. He urged Cried to teach his son a lesson. The audience joined in, roaring with excitement. Some shouted that if Cried lost, he'd go without meals for a week. Others made jokes about what punishments awaited him if he failed. The energy in the hall crackled with tension. Amidst the noise, a soft voice from the crowd wished Urin good luck. He smiled faintly, encouraged. As the duel began, Urin activated Creator's Eye, locking his sights on Cried. Unlike the Burek, Cried's body displayed multiple vital points. Every mark was potentially lethal. Urin, unwilling to inflict real harm, decided to aim for the sword. With a deep breath, he threw the first dagger. It struck Cried's blade with such force that the clash echoed like a cannon blast across the hall. Cried was pushed back, barely maintaining balance. The impact alone cracked his sword. The Marquis blinked, stunned. The sheer power that had come from a simple dagger was unlike anything he'd seen. Urin told Cried that this strike was only a warning, proof that underestimating him was a mistake. Then, with calm composure, he announced that the second throw would carry his full strength. He activated Straight Strike, focused his energy, and hurled the second dagger. Cried braced himself. He raised his sword in defense, but as the blade met the dagger, it shattered under the pressure. The force dropped Cried to his knees. The weapon clattered to the ground beside him, broken. The hall fell into silence once again. The Marquis began to speak, requesting a private conversation with Urin to settle the matter. But Cried interrupted. He said that the bet wasn't over, there was still 1 dagger left. The Marquis tried to wave it off, but Urin turned to Cried and asked him directly. He asked if Cried was truly willing to end things like this, without a final result. He reminded him that a knight's pride demanded victory or defeat, not ambiguity. Cried lowered his head, gritting his teeth. Then, suddenly, he stood and demanded a replacement weapon. His aura flared to life, vivid, wild, and undeniable. The crowd gasped. The berserker trait had awakened. Urin wasn't surprised. He had written this very scene into the story. Cried, pushed to his physical and emotional limit, would unlock his aura and reveal his true potential. This, Yurin thought, was the perfect opportunity to test one of his more advanced techniques. Cried now stood, sword in hand, exuding a blazing aura that rivaled veteran knights. The Marquis, though impressed, grew concerned. Yurin showed no fear, only quiet confidence. The final throw began. Yurin channeled his internal energy and activated the curved mountain technique, which sent the dagger into a spiraling, unpredictable trajectory. Cried narrowed his eyes, confused by the strange movement. He assumed Yurin was mocking him, and his frustration flared. He slashed at the dagger with all his might, but the weapon veered midair, swerving past his blade and striking him cleanly in the shoulder. Cried roared in pain. The crowd, unable to comprehend what had happened, watched in silence. Some murmured that the dagger looked slow, wondering why Cried reacted so strongly. But Yurin knew the truth. He had infused more internal energy into this throw than the previous two. The pain Cried felt was real and deep. Before the situation could escalate further, the Marquis stepped forward, raising his hand. He declared the match over and acknowledged Yurin's victory. He said they would speak privately, later. After the duel, as the commotion settled, Yurin approached Cried, who was still kneeling and clutching his injured shoulder. Without a word, Yurin placed a hand over the wound and activated the internal energy absorption technique. In moments, Cried's pain vanished completely. Startled, he looked up at Yurin and thanked him warmly, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. He apologized for underestimating him, admitting that when he first saw the final dagger moving slowly, he had thought Yurin was mocking him. But now, he said, he understood. It was no trick, but a masterfully executed technique. Cried continued, concluding aloud that such a refined skill couldn't have been learned in just a month. Therefore, Yurin must have been hiding his power all along. His imagination ran even wilder. He speculated that perhaps Yurin was secretly part of an elite group dedicated to protecting the Rock's family, enduring years of humiliation in silence as a selfless shield against hidden enemies. Yurin listened, increasingly amused, realizing that Cried's personality skewed toward wild theories and conspiracies. When Cried offered his unwavering service, pledging to assist in the fight against any secret enemies that might surface, Yurin noticed a change in his status window. Cried's affinity had risen to 26, now marked as favorable. Yurin didn't bother correcting any of the misunderstandings. He simply nodded, saying they would speak again soon. Cried departed with newfound purpose, shouting that he would spread the truth, that Yurin had never been a scoundrel, only a hidden guardian. After he was gone, Erin approached, praising Yurin's performance. She said he had fought well and asked curiously about the unusual technique he used at the end. Yurin replied that it was a new technique he'd recently developed and asked what she thought of it. Erin admitted that she had already replayed the entire scenario in her head. If it had been her facing that technique for the first time, she said, she would have lost. But now, having seen it, she believed she could block it. Yurin smiled, realizing this was due to her clear mind trait, an extremely rare ability. He reminded her that with her talent and years of knightly education, she could have easily become a proper knight had she not become his personal maid. He asked if she was truly satisfied with her current position. The question caught her off guard. Later, the Marquis summoned Yurin to his office. When Yurin entered and addressed him as, "My lord," the Marquis immediately scolded him, saying that when they were alone, he expected to be called father. Yurin was surprised by the sudden informality, but followed suit and spoke plainly, as requested. Then the tone shifted. The Marquis asked about the technique Yurin had used in the duel, stating that he had searched through the family's martial manuals and found nothing even remotely similar. He said such a technique couldn't possibly be learned in a single month, not even by a genius. When pressed, Yurin replied that he couldn't reveal the entire truth, but he had prepared a story in advance, anticipating this moment. He explained that during one of his training sessions, he had gone to the upper library in search of helpful books. There, he stumbled upon an old tome that fell from a top shelf. When he opened it, strange engravings covered the pages, and a blinding light emerged. Before he could react, the contents had been absorbed into his mind, and the book vanished. The Marquis's eyes widened. He said that such an object could only be a grimoire, a legendary artifact where ancient masters inscribed their techniques to be passed down through generations. Yurin, inwardly amused, thought to himself that of course he knew what a grimoire was. After all, he had created the concept himself as part of the story's lore. The Marquis, completely convinced, said that the attic library held so many texts from their ancestors that even he didn't know them all. He added that Urin's discovery was nothing short of divine fortune. Urin nodded, calling it the jackpot of a lifetime. True to his word, the Marquis said he would honor the terms of their agreement. He would no longer force Urin to pursue swordsmanship. Instead, based on the additional clause in the bet, he asked Urin to name his wish. Without hesitation, Urin replied that he wanted the position of heir. The room fell silent. The Marquis, clearly stunned, hesitated. Urin asked, voice laced with sarcasm, if he was going to break his promise now. The Marquis, caught in his own words, admitted he had no choice, it was within his authority, and he would grant the wish. Urin then shifted tone. He said he understood that naming him heir would stir trouble. There would be opposition, and Lady Kenna in particular would cause a storm. Therefore, he said, he would relinquish his wish, this time. The Marquis exhaled deeply and thanked him with heartfelt sincerity. Urin thought to himself that he never had any interest in the position to begin with. Becoming heir meant being shackled to political duties, losing the freedom he needed. Instead, he preferred to hone the martial arts of the Tang clan of Sichuan and roam the world in pursuit of opportunity. The Marquis then asked him to make another wish. Urin said that he wished to establish his own knightly order and appoint both Aaron and Cried as its founding members. The Marquis, relieved, said the request was more than acceptable. He added that Aaron's talents were too valuable to remain limited to the role of a maid. Urin thanked him and then made one final request. Since Aaron would no longer serve as his attendant, a replacement was needed. He proposed Pero, the kitchen worker, and asked that the appointment seem like it came from the Marquis himself. The Marquis eyed him carefully, asking if anything had happened. Urin simply said he would explain in time. The Marquis, placing trust in him, agreed without further questioning. A quick glance at his status window revealed the Marquis's affinity level had risen to 74. Trust. Later that day, Urin gathered Aaron and Cried and formally declared the formation of his knightly order. He appointed both of them as his founding knights and urged them to continue training with unwavering discipline. Then he introduced their new member, Pero, his new personal servant. Aaron looked at Pero with suspicion. It wasn't long before she pulled Urin aside to ask why he had chosen the cook of all people to replace her. Urin calmly told her the truth. Pero was a spy. Aaron was stunned. He explained that Pero had been sent by Knight Commander Karax and Lady Kenna to poison and assassinate him. Aaron was even more confused, asking why he would allow such a person so close. Urin replied with a faint grin that Pero now only obeyed his orders. Just then, Cried interjected, asking a question of his own. Urin welcomed it. Cried pointed out that, despite being a small order, there should still be a vice captain. According to tradition, the role should go to the strongest among them. But Cried questioned Aaron's strength, saying that she looked too young, too fragile. Urin agreed with the logic and permitted a duel between them. Aaron, calm and composed, swiftly defeated Cried. Afterward, she pointed out the flaws in his technique. His attacks were too predictable. Cried accepted the defeat with grace. Urin then declared Aaron the vice captain of the order, and everyone applauded. As Pero left to prepare dinner, Urin decided to test a new ability. Watching Pero walk away, he focused on sensing his vital energy, his ki. Then, activating a technique from the Tang clan's internal arts, secret sound transmission, he funneled his energy into a message directed to Pero's mind. Pero froze, wide-eyed. The voice of Urin echoed inside his skull. Urin told him he was communicating telepathically. Pero, overwhelmed, immediately assumed it was some form of dark sorcery. Urin smirked. Pero muttered to himself that his new master must be a black magician, a poison-wielding warlock. Urin let him believe it. He saw no reason to correct a misunderstanding that only deepened his control. Urin asks whether the poison he requested is prepared. Pero answers that he'd only just managed to prepare Snake's Mind, an extract from 100 venomous snakes. Urin instructs him to liberally dose both the chair and the soup he will consume. Pero, visibly anxious, hurries to carry out the order. That night, while meditating, Urin realizes that his internal energy progress has stalled since reaching the 3rd star. With the realization that a global crisis looms, he decides that it's time to leave the marquisate and seek opportunities to develop his power. He informs his father of his intention to travel. The Marquis, assuming he meant the neighboring village, grants permission. Yurin, hiding his true plans to journey farther, asks for a week's leave. The Marquis, noting his tireless efforts in training, approves the request and asks how many guards he needs. Anticipating reluctance, Yurin initially says he needs no escort, which shocks the Marquis. Reminded that he is heir, Yurin backtracks and says he's only going to the nearest village. The Marquis warns him of how perilous the world is, especially with poisoning, which Yurin internally scoffs at. Realizing he must comply, he reluctantly agrees to take a guard. He sets his departure in 2 days, and the Marquis promises to arrange the escort. That evening, Yurin decides to slip away earlier. He summons Pero, who hesitantly arrives. Yurin asks for money, reminding him of the funds Karox provided for feeding snakes. Pero, frightened but obedient, hands over the gold immediately. Yurin also asks for the partial space bag he glimpsed when Pero handled poisonous herbs, a magical storage sack. Pero, puzzled, agrees to lend it. Yurin gives Pero a fake antidote, actually nothing but dried leaves, said to last a month. He tells Pero that he appreciates his help and that he'll rely on him from now on, promising a genuine cure soon. At dawn, Yurin slips out of the palace, leaving a note behind. He walks through the silent garden and encounters an old gardener, greeting him politely. He senses a powerful aura radiating from the man but chooses to ignore it for now. Crossing into the wild for the first time, Yurin heads to the neighboring village's magic tower. At the reception, he requests to use teleportation. The attendant asks if he's used it before. Yurin says no. When asked for his destination, he names Os Castle. The attendant warns that it's a far journey, and the cost is 50 gold pieces. Yurin pays the steep fee and registers under the alias Polion, a handle from his online gaming days. He is led to the teleportation chamber. After a short wait, a voice announces his arrival. Stepping out, Yurin finds himself in Os Castle's magic tower, greeted by a local attendant. Yurin is surprised by the lack of discomfort. Despite feeling a strange twisting, the attendant proudly explains that the comfort of teleportation is their tower's hallmark. Once outside, Yurin observes the distinct Western architecture and the bustling crowds of Os Castle. He searches through the blacksmith alley for the unicorn workshop until dusk. In a final alley, he meets a blacksmith working late. Yurin asks if he knows of a unicorn workshop. The smith replies that while no such shop exists, he intends to name his own smithy that soon. Yurin realizes he's found the right person. Activating Creator's Eye, Yurin inspects the smith. A status window reveals name, Garanox, traits, wargear crafting, fire affinity, and others. Yurin asks to see his weapons, and Garanox invites him inside. In the workshop, Garanox confides that business has been slow. His secluded location and perceived lack of skill turn customers away. Yurin examines the weapons on display, then scans them with Creator's Eye. Among them are 3 wind spirit swords, each blessed by Sylph, granting increased speed, agility, and movement, and the Great Flame Spirit Sword, blessed by Salamander, boosting strength, stamina, and resilience. Yurin asks if Garanox crafted them. The smith admits he did, but dismisses them as failures, claiming they became too heavy, even for strong individuals, to lift, which is why no one buys them. Yurin, inwardly excited, thinks these swords aren't failures, they've simply yet to meet a worthy wielder who could unleash their potential. He decides to purchase them, imagining they'd suit Iran, or perhaps Aran, perfectly. But he realizes they're not the treasure he's truly seeking. He asks Garanox if he might have any severely rusted weapons instead, intent still gathering the perfect piece for his journey. But to Yurin, fate had guided him precisely where he needed. Among the junk, he found the weapon he was looking for. Garanox offered the entire pile, for just 2 gold pieces. Yurin knew its true worth exceeded 200. In a bold move, Yurin offered Garanox a chance to close his failing shop and become his personal blacksmith. Garanox was stunned. Yurin introduced himself properly. Yurin Rocks of House Rocks, the South's invincible spear. Garanox fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the honor of such a visitor. Yurin had to ask him to rise, but Garanox remained kneeling, humbly awaiting instruction. He asked why someone of Yurin's stature would seek a poor blacksmith. Yurin explained that Garanox's craftsmanship, especially the meticulous sword hilts, spoke of genuine skill and sincerity. He predicted Garanox would awaken a special talent one day, and though he himself wondered if he had made that up on the spot, it worked. Garanox agreed to follow him. He admitted Yurin was nothing like the rumor of a delinquent he'd heard. To seal it, Yurin pulled the rusted dagger. He uttered awaken, and the weapon transformed into a radiant legendary blade, Agnes, the vestige of many forms. Yurin reflected that, in his story, the original hero was destined to claim it. A system window then appeared, asking whether to formalize a spiritual contract with Agnes. Yurin accepted. A flash, a shift, and then a voice reverberated inside his head. Mage Agnes, not a sweet tone as he'd envisioned, but brusque and dismissive. She scolded him for having no talent. He lacked mana, so how could he bind her? She mocked his claim to have learned the awakening words from the Great Prophet, a detail he'd concocted for consistency in his story. Yurin calmly explained that he was the author, and knew the weapon's true nature. It could split into two forms, adapting to any wielded shape. She was supposedly bound to come back when a sub-body was lost. To that, Agnes snarled that knowledge alone meant nothing. Without mana, the contract was meaningless. Annoyed by her arrogance, Yurin forced her into a ring using his internal energy, ignoring her cries of pain. Agnes shrieked as warm chi surged through her form, experiencing the power she'd underestimated. Yurin had just confirmed a critical breakthrough. Martial energy could substitute for mana to wield Agnes's abilities. That revelation shifted everything. With this newfound understanding, he finalized his arrangements with Garanox, telling the blacksmith he needed 2 days to wrap up his personal matters. They agreed to meet again in front of Oz Castle's Central Park at noon in 2 days. As Yurin wandered through the park later that day, he spotted Ilya standing nearby. The sight surprised him, and he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. It hit him. This was the exact location where, in the original story, the protagonist was supposed to meet Ilya for the first time. The timeline had clearly deviated. Ilya was equally surprised and demanded to know what he was doing there. Yurin explained that he had come to find a blacksmith. She raised an eyebrow at that, reminding him that House Rocks had more than enough blacksmiths. Yurin clarified that he wanted someone of his own, someone personally chosen. Ilya said that if he had informed her earlier, she could have helped. But Yurin reassured her, saying he'd already found the right person. Right on cue, Garanox appeared, slightly breathless and apologizing for being late. Yurin introduced him to Ilya, referring to her as his fiancée. At that moment, a knight interrupted them. Addressing Ilya as his squad leader, the knight asked who she was speaking with, noting that it was nearly time for their departure. Ilya introduced Yurin as her fiancé, Yurin Rocks. The knight, masked Malone, visibly stiffened, startled to encounter a noble from House Rocks in such a casual setting. He introduced himself as the leader of the 5th Squad of the Steelhammer Knights, under the Marcus family. Yurin immediately recognized Mask. He was one of the minor characters from his original story, stubborn, prideful, and a thorn in the side of the protagonist. In the story's original flow, this very scene had been different. A mysterious masked attacker was supposed to ambush Mask's squad. The protagonist would intervene, fight Mask in a heated confrontation, and Ilya would arrive just in time to stop them. That incident would mark the beginning of the protagonist's growing connection with her. But now, with Yurin in the protagonist's place, everything had changed. More importantly, Yurin knew that following this event, the protagonist was meant to accompany Ilya on a mission, one where he would save her life. That plot point mattered. Yurin couldn't track down the original protagonist now, and Ilya's survival was non-negotiable. He asked Ilya about her destination. She explained that there had been increasing reports of Goblin activity near Azio Castle, and her squad had been ordered to scout and neutralize the threat. Yurin asked if she would allow him to join them. Ilya was visibly surprised and asked him why he would volunteer for such a dangerous mission. Yurin explained that as someone in training, he wanted to experience real combat, and observe her skills firsthand. Ilya warned him again about the risks, but he said confidently that running away was his specialty. After some hesitation, Ilya agreed and instructed Mask to provide a horse for both Yurin and Garanox. Mask objected, pointing out that neither of them possessed mana. He claimed they lacked both the ability to contribute and the protection needed to avoid being a burden. But Ilya shut him down with a sharp command, adding pointedly that if Mask had issues with leadership, he should have tried for the position himself. Before departing, Ilya told Yurin to stay close to her during the mission. It was too dangerous otherwise. Yurin nodded and ordered Garanox to hold on tightly during the ride. With that, they rode out. Upon arriving near the forested region surrounding Azio Castle, Ilya began issuing orders. She broke her unit into teams of 5, instructing each to search for goblin camps but to avoid initiating combat. Any discoveries were to be marked by launching a signal flare. The knights dispersed into the surrounding wilderness. Time passed, and darkness crept in, making it harder to track anything. As the sun dipped, Ilya finally decided to regroup and turn back. Then, a flare streaked into the sky. Moments later, another lit up from a different direction. Then a third, and a fourth. The knights were thrown into confusion, debating how many flares had gone up. Yurin calmly confirmed 4, though another knight insisted there had been 5. Ilya resolved to move toward the nearest flare to the west. Yurin's pulse quickened as he watched the grim scene before him at the sight of the first flare. Ilya's squad had arrived, only to discover all the soldiers dead, armor melted into grotesque shapes, evidence of a horror beyond anything they'd imagined. Shock rippled through the group. Ilya responded swiftly, ordering the unit to ride south toward the next flare. At the second location, the horror repeated. More bodies, the same melted armor. One knight urged the captain to press on. Time was slipping away. Yurin couldn't stay silent any longer. He jolted forward, his voice loud and urgent. The goblins were hunting them in fragmented groups, wearing them down one by one. If they continued piecemeal, no one would survive. He insisted they end the operation and fire a signal flare here to regroup all remaining forces immediately. A knight erupted in outrage, demanding to know who Yurin was to question orders, blaming him for this chaos. Yurin froze the knight with internal energy pressure, a silent, invisible force that caused the man to collapse from his horse, terrified. Ilya stared in bewilderment. She couldn't comprehend how Yurin had toppled him without physical contact. Yurin commanded the knight to know his place, and, trembling, the knight fell into silence. Turning to Ilya, Yurin gently reminded her that in the original story, she had resisted the protagonist's warning, an error that had nearly destroyed them. He asked her to judge wisely this time. Ilya looked around, taking in the corpses and the scattered forces, and nodded. She ordered the blue flare ignited instantly. Moments later, multiple knights responded. Lights flickered in the darkness as scattered forces began converging. Garanox murmured his admiration, asking if Yurin truly expected reinforcements to arrive in time. Yurin's reply was grim, most of them wouldn't make it. Garanox's face turned pale as he realized what Yurin meant. An enemy, Karuta, had already taken them down off-screen. The real battle was about to begin. Suddenly, a terrified scout burst through the group, shouting that they must flee. Ilya demanded to know what was happening just as an overwhelming goblin horde surged into view. Dozens, hundreds, swarmed across the clearing. Another knight screamed that their numbers were terrifyingly vast. Ilya froze, guilt washing over her. She murmured an apology to Yurin, fearing his death was now certain. Yurin steadied her with calm assurance. She would not die today. He stepped forward, resolve sharpening in his eyes. He called out. He would now test what they had trained over the last 2 days. He summoned Agnes to generate black iron bullets by proxy, a technique born from his mastery of the third-level body of 10,000 poisons. A system window appeared before Yurin. The black iron blast technique fired hidden weapons imbued with internal power, relying on detonations of black iron bullets. Yurin shouted for the goblins to receive his attack. He threw a bullet. It embedded in a goblin's weapon, then, amid their confusion, exploded. A wave of destruction ripped through the front line. Screams and chaos erupted. The bullets returned. Yurin hurled them again and again. Explosions followed in rapid succession, decimating line after line of goblins. Ilya, awestruck, demanded to know what he had thrown. Yurin replied steadily, it was black iron blast, and he would explain the details later. Seeing the horde's strength falter, Ilya shouted to her knights, reminding them that victory was now within their grasp. She urged them to seize the moment. The knights, inspired, surged forward to engage the remaining enemy. In the thick of battle, one goblin tried to flee, but something red and massive intercepted it. A red hand snapped over the goblin's head, and it screamed before collapsing. Ilya turned, stunned, as a colossal red-skinned warrior emerged. giant, brutal, and holding the corpse of a slain goblin. Yuren's jaw tightened. The legendary goblin warrior, Karuta, had finally appeared. He thought grimly. Failure was not an option. If they could not defeat Karuta today, none of them would survive. The real fight had begun. Karuta roared, his reddish aura erupting in violent waves of wind. He swung his sword and took a stance, ready to charge at Ilya. She realized she couldn't counter his power and prepared to evade. At that moment, Yuren rushed forward to save her, scolding her for standing still. Together, they narrowly avoided Karuta's crushing strike as it shattered the ground, and Yuren carried Ilya to safety on his back. Once they stopped, he shouted that she had nearly died. Ilya barely heard him. The battlefield around them was silent. Every one of her soldiers lay dead. Karuta was already preparing his next attack. Yuren acted fast, pulling out a black iron explosive and hurling it at him. It landed near Karuta's ear and exploded, but when the smoke cleared, he was completely unharmed. Not a single scratch marked his skin. Karuta muttered something in his own tongue. Yuren was shaken. None of his attacks worked. He remembered that orc warriors were said to have skin as hard as steel, but seeing it in person was terrifying. Ilya, enraged at the slaughter of her subordinates, cursed him. She called his actions unforgivable and raised her sword, infusing it with aura. Charging forward, she struck fast and hard, but Karuta blocked her with ease. She kept attacking, her strikes relentless, yet his parries remained effortless. Jiranox and Yuren watched closely. Yuren thought that her strength was impressive, expected, even for the famed Sword Empress. Despite being early in her journey, she was already strong enough to push Karuta this far. Still, his steel-like skin and armor held firm. He stood unmoved, muttering again in his strange language, before suddenly releasing an immense burst of aura. Ilya froze. An orc using aura was impossible, or so she had believed. Karuta launched a fierce counterattack, and she barely managed to block. Just like in the original tale, she began to lose ground. Overwhelmed by his power, she finally collapsed. Karuta, untouched, advanced toward her. Her knights rushed to her side, helping her stand. Frustrated, Ilya admitted that she couldn't defeat him and ordered a retreat. But as Karuta closed in, Yuren stepped between them. Karuta spoke again in his language, but Yuren ignored him and drew a dagger, throwing it with all his strength. Karuta reflexively swung his sword, shattering the blade instantly. Yuren was stunned, until Karuta noticed a wound on his shoulder. It glowed, then erupted in a violent explosion that crippled his arm. Yuren laughed, explaining that the first dagger had been a decoy. The real one had been thrown from behind. Smirking, he remarked that while Karuta's skin was like steel, every armor had its weak points, and he intended to exploit them. Furious, Karuta swung his sword at Yuren. Startled, Yuren barely dodged the first strike, then the second, before firing another shot. He taunted Karuta, asking where he was going as the bullet exploded against him. Advancing confidently, he mocked the orc, saying he had no intention of being captured. Suddenly, Yuren noticed Karuta preparing to attack Jiranox. The orc leapt high into the air, sword raised for a killing blow. With no time to think, Yuren sprinted forward, determined to save him. He decided to use the dragon step technique, a lesser version, but he poured all his energy into it, forcing his body to its limit for speed. Just as the orc's blade descended, Yuren reached Jiranox and pulled him away. The sword struck the ground with a thunderous crash, shaking the earth. Karuta's eyes widened in disbelief at Yuren's speed, and Ilya, watching from afar, was equally astonished. She could hardly believe what she had witnessed. After saving Jiranox, Yuren realized the battle needed to end quickly. He drew his sword, Anyus, and commanded it to transform into the Bloodflower butterfly, a legendary hidden weapon from the Sichuan Tang family. In an instant, the sword dissolved into a storm of glowing butterflies, swirling with mysterious energy. Using the curved shot technique, Yuren launched them at the orc. Despite the chaos, Ilya found herself mesmerized by the beauty of the spectacle, quietly admitting its elegance. Karuta, however, was seized by instinctive fear. He swung wildly, cutting at the butterflies, but one landed on his chest and shone with blinding light before exploding. The blast was devastating. Karuta fell, his massive body collapsing with a final roar. Both Ilya and Yuren were stunned by the weapon's destructive power. Yurin had expected it to be strong but never imagined it could completely fell an orc warrior in one strike. The soldiers nearby trembled, stammering that the orc was finally dead and victory was theirs. But Ilya quickly regained focus, warning them that the fight wasn't over. Smaller orc forces were still scattered nearby. The remaining orcs, panicked by her command, began to falter. Without hesitation, she led her troops to finish them off. Jiranox soon approached Yurin, thanking him earnestly for saving his life. The battle had ended in victory. By nightfall, the last of the orc forces had been wiped out. Afterward, Yurin approached Ilya, asking if she was hurt. She assured him she was fine but admitted she owed him her life and didn't know how to thank him. Yurin only laughed, saying that helping each other was natural and not worth worrying about. Then he reminded her of her earlier question about his swordsmanship. With a calm smile, he explained that he had trained not in swordplay but in hidden weapons. Ilya was stunned, asking if he meant weapons like daggers. Yurin confirmed, saying that both the explosive orb and the butterfly technique were part of his hidden arsenal. Ilya was both impressed and overwhelmed by Yurin's mastery of hidden weapons. She realized that his skill went far beyond what she had imagined. Yurin, meanwhile, quietly hoped this encounter would expand her view of combat. Having been raised to believe the sword was the ultimate weapon, perhaps now she would recognize the power of other arts as well. A soldier soon reported that the magic pouch was ready. Upon hearing this, Ilya raised her sword and stated that even if they could not collect every fallen orc, they must at least take the remains of the orc warrior as proof of victory. Without hesitation, she began gathering the remains herself. Jiranox, staring at the enormous corpse, shook his head in disbelief, remarking that the pouch would surely be ruined if they stored the remains inside. Ilya replied calmly that it was fine. The pouch had been designed for holding monster remains, so it would not go to waste. With that, she sealed the orc warrior's remains inside. Once finished, she turned to Yurin and announced that they had to leave quickly before the night grew too deep. They mounted their horses and set off, but their path was soon blocked by Musk and two other soldiers who appeared suddenly on the road. Narrowing her eyes, Ilya demanded to know where he had been, reminding him that a long time had passed since the signal flare. Musk flinched, clearly uneasy, and claimed they had gone too far ahead, been ambushed by orcs, and delayed while fighting them off. Ilya listened, her face unreadable, but suspicion flickered in her gaze. She questioned why only two soldiers had returned if his story were true. Musk hastily replied that the others had been slaughtered by stronger than expected orcs. Still unconvinced, Ilya ordered him to take her to the battlefield so she could see for herself. Musk hesitated, urging her to wait until morning, saying it was too dark and dangerous to travel back. But Ilya's voice hardened as she commanded that he guide her immediately. Realizing he could not escape, Musk exhaled shakily and stepped closer, pretending to explain the location. Then, without warning, he drew his sword and lunged at her. Caught off guard, Ilya's eyes widened, but before the blade could reach her, Yurin reacted instantly. He threw a dagger with flawless precision, striking Musk's arm and forcing him to drop his weapon. Musk cried out, falling from his horse and clutching his bleeding arm. Fury burned in Yurin's voice as he confronted him. He said that Musk's story had been foolish from the start. Any soldier who had just fought orcs would show signs of exhaustion or injury, yet Musk and his men were perfectly fine. He accused them of betraying their comrades, colluding with the orcs, and leaking information from within their ranks. Musk trembled violently, his guilt written across his face. Yurin's certainty came not from intuition but from knowledge. He knew every detail of this story because he was the one who had written it. Nothing escaped him. Ilya, her expression cold and resolute, raised her sword. Musk dropped to his knees, pleading desperately, insisting that his family had served the realm faithfully. But Ilya's gaze didn't waver. She dismissed his words as empty lies. With a decisive strike, she ended his treachery. Yurin watched her unwavering resolve and remarked that her strength and judgment were admirable. Ilya then ordered her knights to seize the remaining traitors. The two men collapsed, begging for mercy and claiming they had only obeyed Musk's orders. The following day at Aas Castle, morning turned to noon. Inside their quarters, Jiranox tried to wake Yurin, who was still sound asleep. Slowly opening his eyes, Yurin asked what was happening. Jiranox chuckled and told him it was already midday. With a teasing grin, he added that Ilya had arrived, wearing a striking black gown. That news made Yurin sit up in surprise, his mind instantly picturing the scene. When he finally looked up and saw her standing there, his first thought was to ask about the unexpected outfit, so different from her usual armor. Ignoring his question, Ilya calmly said that he needed to accompany her to her home. Her father, she explained, wished to meet him. Looking at her, Yurin found himself thinking that the rumors about her being the world's most beautiful woman were no exaggeration. Her grace and presence confirmed it. With no real alternative, he agreed to go with her, though a thought lingered in his mind. This was exactly how the story was meant to unfold. The moment when the protagonist saved Ilya and met Marquis Marcus for the first time. Ilya left the room, instructing Yurin to prepare himself and meet her outside. As she departed, Yurin secretly opened her status window and noticed something unexpected. Her affection toward him had already risen to favorable, all from saving her once. The discovery surprised him. In his eyes, it was an early but meaningful shift in their bond. When he finally joined her, she waited patiently, and together they set off. Their walk, however, was interrupted by a crowd of commoners. Upon recognizing Ilya, the people called out to her as the Ironblood Knight. Rumors had already spread that she was the warrior who had faced the terrifying orc without retreating. The title suited her perfectly. It was the same one she bore in the original story. Soon the crowd noticed Yurin at her side. The young women among them whispered excitedly, referring to him as the Steel Mage, admiring his looks and composure. Yurin was startled by this sudden title, but it made sense once he realized how the rumor started. The surviving soldiers had described how he had manipulated steel in battle, mistaking his hidden weapons for magic. Ilya, a faint blush on her cheeks, turned to him and expressed deep gratitude, saying that he had saved her life not once but twice. Her sincerity warmed Yurin's heart. He replied that protecting her had simply been natural. As they walked, Ilya explained that earlier that morning, she had returned to the battlefield with soldiers to recover the remaining bodies. The devastation was far worse than she had imagined, and seeing it made her realize that without Yurin's help, she would have died there as well. Yurin listened silently, feeling the weight of her words. But Ilya did not allow despair to linger. She vowed to train harder than ever, to become a warrior strong enough to surpass every obstacle. Yurin smiled inwardly, knowing this was the moment she would begin her transformation, the spark that would lead her toward the legendary Sword Emperor trait. Before long, they arrived at the warp circle prepared by her father. Though the Marcus estate was nearby, the Marquis had arranged for magical transportation to make the journey swift. The mages began their chant, and in an instant, the world shifted. When Yurin opened his eyes, they stood before a vast, elegant estate. He was taken aback by the sudden change in scenery, while Ilya calmly welcomed him to her home. Leading the way inside, she moved with practiced grace. Girinox followed, unable to hide his awe, whispering to Yurin that he had never seen anything so grand. Yurin, though feeling slightly dizzy from the teleportation, composed himself and reminded himself that soon he would meet her father, just as in the original story. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of polished wood and noble luxury. Yurin silently thought that this would finally be his chance to taste the refined food of the upper class. When they entered the grand dining hall, Ilya's father, Marquis Marcus, was already waiting. With a powerful presence, he invited Yurin forward and told him to sit comfortably, saying there was no need for formality. Yurin obeyed respectfully. The Marquis began by thanking him, first not as a nobleman, but as a father whose daughter's life had been saved. Yurin replied humbly, saying it had been only natural to protect her. Soon, the chef arrived, placing a dish before him with great care. Yurin's anticipation grew, until he realized the dish was Tyrian soup. Though richer than the Rox family version, it was still the same simple meal he had eaten daily before. His excitement dimmed, though he managed to hide his disappointment. The Marquis proudly explained that the Marcus family, too, held the custom of eating Tyrian soup after every battle, as both a symbol of honor and nourishment. Left with no choice, Yurin began eating, thinking wryly that nothing about it impressed him. After all, he had once survived on poisoned Tyrian soup. This was hardly a delicacy. As the meal continued, Marquis Marcus suddenly asked the question that made Yurin nearly choke. He asked when Yurin planned to marry his daughter. Ilya flushed red and looked down in embarrassment. Yurin quickly realized that the Marquis was testing him. In the original story, Marcus's affection toward him had been negative, but now something had clearly changed. Deciding to meet the test head-on, Yurin declared that he wished to marry Ilya immediately. His boldness deepened her blush, her heart pounding at his words. But before the moment could stretch, Yurin clarified that he was not yet the official heir of his house. Once regarded as a scoundrel, he still had much to prove. He said with conviction that he would change, become someone truly worthy of Ilya, and only after earning the heir's title would he ask for her hand. His sincerity touched Ilya deeply. Her father, however, remained unconvinced. Marcus leaned forward and asked whether Yurin truly believed he could surpass his brothers, who were known to be prodigies. Yurin met his gaze without hesitation and replied with absolute certainty that he could, and would. The Marquis' stern demeanor softened into a faint smile. He admitted he admired Yurin's determination and declared that he would support his growth. Then his tone shifted as he revealed that communication had already come from the Rox family. The news stunned Yurin. Marcus explained that word of his deeds had spread quickly through magical channels and that his father wished to speak to him directly. Once they finished their meal, Marcus said he would personally lead Yurin to the communication chamber. Yurin thanked him, though he noticed Ilya sulking quietly beside him, for reasons he couldn't quite place. Regardless, it seemed he had left a strong impression on her father. Later that day, Yurin entered the communication room. The circle activated, and his father's projection appeared before him. A vivid magical likeness. The older man's face was thunderous with anger as he began shouting, his voice echoing through the chamber. Yurin hurried to apologize, trying to calm him. Beneath the anger, however, was genuine concern. The Marquis eventually asked if Yurin was injured. Yurin assured him he was fine. Then came the question that mattered most, whether it was true that he had saved Ilya and slain the orc warrior. Yurin admitted that it was, though he downplayed it as luck. His father fell silent for a moment, then said he would hear the full account upon Yurin's return. Finally, he asked when Yurin planned to come home. Yurin answered that he would return the day after tomorrow. At that, his father gave one final order. That Yurin should bring his brothers with him. The command left Yurin frozen in disbelief, unsure of what awaited him next. The next scene unfolded in a lavish salon of the Marcus estate, sunset spilling gold across fine drapes. 3 figures sat around an ornate table, the mustached Marquis Marcus at ease on the central sofa, Ilya poised beside him, and Yurin sitting upright across from them. The Marquis remarked with mild surprise that Yurin intended to leave as soon as tomorrow. He continued softly, saying that it would be nice if he stayed longer since it had been so long since their last meeting. Yurin responded respectfully, explaining that he would like to, but his father had entrusted him with a task. The Marquis waved his hand with his usual generosity, declaring it a shame and promising to prepare warp magic for an easier journey. Yurin chuckled lightly, concealing his thoughts behind a polite smile. Leaning forward, he said with quiet determination that he was grateful but would decline. The Marquis raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Yurin clarified that he preferred to travel and train the hard way, rather than depend on warp. The Marquis broke into a grin, saying that he truly had changed, and that he looked forward to seeing how much stronger he would become. Ilya gave him a gentle smile to which he nodded with calm confidence, thanking her. As she turned away, a subtle smile touched her lips. Watching her, he thought with faint amazement that she was smiling again. Perhaps she genuinely approved of his answer this time. Yet there is a deeper reason behind his refusal of the warp. The next morning, beneath a bright sky, he stood at the estate gates with his cloak fastened. With crisp energy, he called over his shoulder for Girinox to follow. Girinox, pack slung over one shoulder, asked carefully if they were heading to the capital. When Yurin nodded, Girinox pointed down the main road and said that this was the way. Yurin shook his head, explaining that they had another stop first. He pointed toward a distant mountain ridge beside the Marquisate and stated that their destination lay there. Girinox's eyes widened, asking if that was not the dragon's lair. Yurin repeated the name thoughtfully. Girinox nodded eagerly, saying that he had visited once before opening his forge, and asked with childlike curiosity if the young master planned to make a wish there. Yurin cut him off coldly, saying no. A sly smile crossed his lips as his thoughts turned inward. He was going there not to make a wish, but to claim a treasure. A treasure that only he knew about, one originally meant for the protagonist of the story. The two trekked down the dirt path, boots striking rhythmically as the estate's polished roads gave way to forest. Their destination was the ancient cave known as the Dragon's Lair, once home to dragons long ago. They climbed a rise to find the cavern's vine-draped mouth, where early visitors were already leaving offerings. Giranox gawked, saying that it was still early and yet so many people had come to pray. Worried, he asked if with so many around, there would be any treasure left. Urin, unfazed, glanced at the glittering trinkets scattered near the entrance and remarked that those were all fakes. Giranox blinked, confused. Urin stepped closer to the vine-curtained entrance, scanning the stonework with a smirk, and concluded quietly that the world was full of hidden things. Passing through the praying crowd, he motioned for Giranox to follow, saying they would take the path around the mountain. Giranox stumbled over his agreement and hurried after him. They climbed over uneven rocks and along a narrow ledge until Giranox, panting, pointed at a bare cliff and said that there was nothing there. Urin fell silent, eyes sharpening as realization struck. He stepped to an irregular stone slab and thought to himself that this must be it, the hidden entrance he had designed himself, shaped like a car door handle. Glancing around to make sure no one was nearby, he pressed his palm to the stone and thought that opening it was just like opening a car door. The rock vibrated, a seam cracked open. Giranox stumbled back, exclaiming in disbelief. Urin smiled faintly and told him to follow. They slipped through the narrow gap, which sealed behind them with a deep rumble. Inside, the air glowed with soft light from moss and old sconces. Giranox gazed around in awe, saying that it was brighter than he had imagined. He darted toward a cluster of shining crystals, exclaiming that they must be gemstones. Urin stopped him sharply, warning that touching them would trigger a trap. Giranox froze and asked what kind of trap. Urin, studying the patterns, answered calmly that it would likely turn the entire cave into a sea of fire, and both of them would be burned alive. They moved cautiously deeper, Urin warning that many other traps awaited and instructing Giranox to stay close. Giranox nodded nervously. Their careful steps led them into a wide chamber centered around a low stone pedestal. Urin said that they had arrived. Giranox circled the pedestal in wonder, saying that it was impressive but empty. Urin gestured toward it and asked if he knew what lay beneath. Giranox, baffled, stammered that he did not. Urin explained that this false dragon's lair ended there, but beyond that wall he could sense the energy of those praying outside. That right now, those people were unknowingly bowing toward them. Giranox could only murmur in confusion. With a single clap, Urin announced that it was time to see the treasure. Giranox echoed the word in surprise. Kneeling, Urin pulled a hidden handle beneath the altar. A deep rumble followed, and the stone lid slid aside, revealing several packed sacks. Giranox gasped in awe, recognizing them as gold coins. Urin reached inside and lifted a small black box, declaring that this was worth far more than gold. Opening it, light spilled over his fingers as an interface identified the item. Warrior's Jade. Rebirth Effect. An artifact essential for power and growth. He snapped the box shut and briskly ordered Giranox to load the gold into a magic pouch. The man obeyed immediately. They emerged into daylight, weaving through the departing travelers. Giranox asked where they would go next. Urin mentioned that warps to Ascastle's Tower of Magic departed from here. Giranox nodded in understanding. Giranox smiled faintly, remarking that even this early, the roads were full of people, and laughed softly. Then, suddenly, Urin's face tensed. His breath hitched. A cold sense of dread washed through him as he thought that something was wrong. From the crowd, a hooded figure approached, its presence radiating suffocating pressure. He immediately invoked the eye of the Creator. Recognition struck like lightning. The woman before them. She should not have appeared yet. He reeled inwardly, insisting that it was impossible, that she was supposed to appear only in the latter half of the story. Giranox called to him anxiously, asking what was wrong. Urin's pulse quickened as he assessed her overwhelming aura. With cold clarity, he concluded that she was an existence he could not possibly defeat. His decision came instantly and without hesitation. He had to get away from here, and fast. Urin dashed off, insisting he was starving, and Giranox hurried after him, urging him to slow down. Far behind them, a woman cloaked in black turned her head, drawn by the noise as if something about the moment mattered to her. Later, inside the vast walls of Aas Castle, Urin sat on his bed, troubled by a nagging sense that something was off. He kept thinking about the strange figure he had seen earlier and felt she belonged far later in any story he knew. The thought left a deep frown on his face. He wondered why such a powerful being had appeared so early and in such a place. His eyes drifted to a shining pill resting in a box. He considered the possibility that the creature had been seeking the treasure from the divine dragon cave, a plot meant for much later. It dawned on him that the story he remembered was shifting in unexpected ways. To make things worse, he had no idea where the real protagonist was or what they were doing. There had been no hints, no sightings, nothing. Pushing the worry aside, he reached for the pill. As soon as he swallowed it, a sharp heat tore through him and a surge of blue energy raced along his veins. He dropped into a cross-legged position, focusing on guiding the overwhelming force. A system message announced that his transformation had begun. Another followed, stating his body was strengthening. He knew he needed power, and he needed it quickly. Time passed in silence while he meditated. Morning light eventually slipped through the window, and when he opened his eyes, a new message greeted him. It declared that he had become a heavenly martial body. He whispered to himself with a wide grin that he had hit the jackpot. This was the legendary physique praised in countless tales, perfect for any physical pursuit involving blades or fists. It even granted the ability to copy any technique after seeing it just once. He jumped to his feet, feeling lighter and stronger. At that moment a knock sounded, and Girinox asked from outside if he could enter. Urin allowed it. Girinox stepped in, ready to mention breakfast, but froze instead. He stared at Urin and stammered that the young master seemed to have grown taller overnight. Urin tried to brush it off, claiming Girinox must be imagining it. Girinox refused to back down, explaining that as a blacksmith he judged measurements with precision. He insisted that Urin had been 178 centimeters the day before and now appeared to be 182. Still uneasy, Urin muttered that Girinox's sharp eye was nothing to joke about. After getting ready and finishing breakfast, they headed to the Grand Magic Tower. The receptionist greeted them kindly and asked how he could help. Urin said he wanted to use the warp gate. The man smiled as he asked where they needed to go. Urin answered that they were heading to the capital. The man's smile faded, and he explained that access to the capital was restricted. He added that the city belonged to the nobility and that ordinary people had no right to enter without special permission. Without hesitation, Urin revealed who he was. He stated that he was Urin Rox, eldest son of the Marquis family, and that the man behind him was his personal blacksmith, Girinox. Magicians nearby overheard and gathered around him. They recognized him as Lord Urin, the Steel Mage. Urin, slightly embarrassed, scratched the back of his head and admitted that this was indeed who he was. The magicians crowded closer, asking if it was true he could fling iron balls endlessly, how they exploded, what formulas he used, and how he chose his targets. Before he could answer, a wooden staff struck the floor with a sharp sound. In an instant, Urin and Girinox disappeared and reappeared in a luxurious hall. They looked around in confusion, wondering where they had been taken. An old man apologized nearby, explaining that his student had behaved rudely. Urin, not recognizing him, asked who he was. The old man, dressed in a magician's uniform and holding a staff crowned with a glowing red orb, introduced himself. He said his name was Ubian, head of the AAS Castle Magic Tower Council. Urin's expression tightened as he recognized the name. He remembered creating Ubian as a character for fun. On the surface the man looked like a gentle elder, but Urin knew that when angered he became a merciless killer who removed anyone who annoyed him. Urin felt a chill at the thought of meeting two dangerous figures in such a short time. Ubian then stated he would warp them straight to the capital from this very room. Urin thanked him. Ubian walked toward the warp machine, then paused and looked back with a dark smile, saying he had a feeling they would meet again soon. The idea alone made Urin grimace. He silently wished never to see the man again. Suddenly lightning struck the tower, and a moment later the warp activated, hurling them to the capital. As they walked through the streets, Girinox gasped at the elegant buildings and the fine clothing worn by the citizens. Urin handed him money and told him to buy better clothes for himself. Eventually they reached the Royal Knight Academy, a place built like a grand university. Urin approached the gatekeeper and requested entry. The guard asked for his name and the name of the person he intended to visit. Urin stated he was Urinrox and that he was looking for his brother Collinrox. The guards let him through. As he walked deeper inside, someone called his name from the side. A handsome man with silver hair approached. Urin confirmed that he was indeed Urinrox. The man studied him with a sharp gaze and asked if he was the same Urinrox who had defeated the orc warrior. Yurin realized how fast stories traveled within the capital's walls. The man's lips curved into a faint smile as he remarked that Yurin must possess remarkable strength. Yurin felt a flicker of surprise at how casually the man spoke to him. He replied politely that the compliment was generous, then asked for his name. The man introduced himself as Carrick Ilian, second son of the Duke Ilian family, and added that he was a close friend of Colin. He then turned and guided Yurin onward, saying they were going to meet Colin. Still, Yurin sensed something unusual about Carrick. He quietly told Girinox to remain where he was, then followed Carrick deeper into the academy. As they walked, Carrick spoke again. He says that he has already heard the rumors that Yurin did not face the orc warrior alone, but fought with Lady Aaliyah at his side. He explains that Lady Aaliyah's strength is widely known, that she is a rising knight, yet Yurin's role in that battle was the truly surprising part. He goes on, saying that very little is actually known about Lord Yurin and asking if he really uses magic during his fights. Yurin answers that he does not, that he is not a mage. At this, a faint, sly smile flickers across Carrick's face. Carrick leads on in silence, leaving Yurin to brood. Yurin wonders what the man is plotting and questions whether he really saw that smirk or imagined it. Eventually, Carrick brings him to a huge training hall, its floor patterned with circles and filled with students drilling sword forms, their blades flashing in the light. A blue-haired student pauses his practice and approaches Carrick. Carrick asks him if he has seen Colin. The student stammers that Carrick himself has just taken Colin to see a professor. Irritation surges through Yurin as he realizes Carrick has already pulled Colin away somewhere else and brought only him here. The blue-haired student then glances at Yurin and asks who the man behind Carrick is. Carrick immediately answers that this is Lord Yurin Rox, Colin's older brother, and says that he is the one who helped subdue the orc warrior alongside Lady Aaliyah. With a touch of showmanship, he adds that Lord Yurin is not a mage at all and clarifies that this means Yurin fights purely with his own strength, just like the rest of them. Curiosity erupts. Students crowd around Yurin, firing questions one after another. Some say that they heard he fights with daggers. Others ask if it is true he throws strange balls and even butterflies in combat. Acting as their spokesman, Carrick suggests that perhaps Lord Yurin would be kind enough to demonstrate his skill to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Annoyance and anger coil in Yurin's chest, but he finally agrees. He and a student named Mealy step into the center of the hall while the others form a ring around them. Carrick announces that Mealy's ability is about average for their group. When Carrick notices the wooden sword in Yurin's hand, he asks in surprise if Yurin had not said he used daggers. Yurin explains that, since this is not a real fight, he will use a sword instead. Carrick, still taken aback, nods and says that they should give it their best. Yurin studies the faces in the crowd and realizes they're all high-ranking nobles. He senses how they have been looking down on him from the moment he arrived, dismissing him because he uses daggers instead of swords. He tells himself that this will not matter for long. He decides to use this chance to test the power of his heavenly martial body. An invisible force hums faintly around him as he steps forward with his wooden sword. Across from him, Mealy practically swells with confidence and declares that he will grant Yurin the first move. With nothing to lose, Yurin advances. He raises his sword in a simple overhead guard and brings it straight down. Mealy, expecting something intricate instead of such a plain and seemingly slow attack, is briefly stunned, then hurriedly lifts his own sword to block. The wooden blades collide. Mealy's strength proves completely insufficient. Yurin's strike drives the other sword back so hard that it smacks into Mealy's face. A collective gasp ripples through the hall. Carrick and the students stare, stunned, as Mealy collapses to the floor, a lump already forming on his forehead, defeated by a single basic strike. To save face, Carrick quickly claims that Mealy must have simply lowered his guard. Still eager for more, he asks Yurin for another match and calls out a student named Rula from the crowd. He introduces Rula as a mid to upper level fighter, much stronger than Mealy, and warns him not to repeat Mealy's mistake. Rula responds confidently, insisting that no one should compare him to that muscle pig Mealy. Yurin and Rula take their stances. At Carrick's signal, the duel begins. Rula charges the instant it starts. To Yurin's enhanced senses, the rush appears painfully slow, a clear demonstration of how far his heavenly martial body has elevated him. He repeats the same basic technique. He lifts his sword overhead, then brings it down in a clean, direct line toward Rula. Rula tries to block, raising his sword to intercept, but Yurin's strength is overwhelming. Rula's blade is forced back, once again smashing into its owner's face. Carrick stands frozen, completely shocked, while Rula crumples like mealy before him. Yurin remains standing, looking calmly down at the defeated student. Inwardly, he thanks his heavenly martial body for the tremendous increase in strength, speed, and reflexes that has carried him far beyond normal human limits. He then remarks with a cold hint of mockery that the Night Academy seems to produce only weak fighters. The comment hits Carrick hard. Stung by the insult, he immediately issues another challenge. He declares that this time Yurin's opponent will be the strongest fighter present, himself. Yurin responds with quiet confidence and tells Carrick to brace himself. They both ready their weapons. Carrick gathers his inner energy, muscles tightening, then bursts into motion, circling Yurin at high speed and leaving blurred afterimages around the arena. The display impresses the watching students. Yurin, however, remains unmoved. He stands firm and simply waits. The moment Carrick thinks he spots an opening, he lunges in to strike. Yurin's sharpened senses, enhanced by his heavenly martial body, read the incoming blow perfectly. With a small, precise step back along a subtle angle, he slips out of the line of attack. Once again, he raises his sword high and brings it down with crushing force. Carrick tries to block, but Yurin's raw power smashes through his defense and slams into his head. Carrick goes down, defeated like the others. Yurin stands over him, victorious, while the students stare in stunned silence, struggling to accept what they have just witnessed. That silence is broken when a voice from behind the crowd asks what is happening and why everyone is gathered there. At the sight of the newcomer, some students murmur that Lord Colin has arrived. Colin surveys the scene in confusion and asks again what exactly is going on. His eyes fall on Yurin, whom he does not recognize, and he asks who this stranger is. Yurin looks at him, thinking quietly that this is the one, the sword prodigy, his younger brother Colin Rocks. A purple-haired man steps forward and explains to Colin that the unfamiliar figure standing before them is actually Yurin, his own older brother, who has come to see him. Colin blinked at the declaration, glancing around in confusion before asking where his brother was. The purple-haired man, just as bewildered, pointed straight at Yurin and exclaimed that he was standing right in front of them. Colin scoffed, convinced it had to be a joke. He said that there was no way this tall, sharp-featured man could be the same Yurin he remembered. But as he studied Yurin more closely, his disbelief faltered. His eyes widened, and a trace of unease crossed his face as he asked how Yurin could have changed so drastically. Yurin answered calmly, saying he had only lost some weight. Colin stared, stunned. It was obvious the change was far more dramatic. Yurin had not only slimmed down but had somehow grown noticeably taller as well. Yurin added casually that the height had come with the weight loss. Colin's gaze drifted to the unconscious students on the floor. He asked what had happened to them. The purple-haired man stepped in and explained everything that had unfolded. With every detail, Colin's disbelief grew. By the end, he looked at Yurin again and asked if the rumor about him catching an orc warrior was also true. Yurin answered with a steady nod. A storm of emotions twisted through Colin. Before he could sort any of it, Yurin's tone dropped into something cold. He demanded to know how Colin could speak so disrespectfully to his own older brother. Colin shouted back that he simply couldn't believe Yurin had become this strong. Yurin narrowed his eyes and asked if Colin intended to go all out against him. That only fueled Colin's resentment. He snapped that he had never truly considered Yurin an older brother and insisted the only advantage Yurin ever had was being born 2 years earlier. A cold rage lit in Yurin's eyes. He stepped forward in open challenge, saying that if Colin felt that way, he should come at him. Colin let out a mocking laugh and said that was exactly what he wanted. But before he could move, Yurin stopped him and suggested they make a bet. He stated that the loser would owe the winner one wish. Colin hesitated, then nodded with determination and told Yurin to get ready. He motioned for a wooden sword while the purple-haired man leaned in again, whispering quickly, likely explaining how Yurin had flattened the other students. Once the match began, Colin released a powerful aura, showing he intended to fight at full strength. Yurin acknowledged this silently, almost approving. Colin was undeniably talented. He wielded swift sword techniques at level 2, quick movement at level 2, and carried the rare Sword Emperor trait, an innate gift for swordsmanship. Yet beneath all that skill, his hostility toward Yurin was ice cold. Colin lunged forward in a burst of speed. Yurin watched the charge with practiced calm, calculating every angle. No matter how he assessed it, he knew he wouldn't lose. With a fluid small dragon step, he slipped to the side of Colin's attack and moved to counter. But unlike the earlier matches, Yurin chose not to finish this instantly. He intended to teach Colin, not crush him in a single blow. The spar stretched on for 10 relentless minutes, swings, dodges, counters, and clean strikes landing again and again on Colin. The students who had first watched in shock now stared in open awe, unable to deny Yurin's absolute dominance. At last, exhausted and frustrated, Colin admitted defeat. His dismissive tone still irritated Yurin, who responded with a light but pointed tap of the sword. This time Colin winced, tears forming as he pleaded for Yurin to stop. Yurin pointed his wooden blade at him and stated firmly that if Colin acted out again, the next session would be twice as harsh. Thoroughly humbled, Colin stood straighter. Then Yurin issued his next command. From now on, whenever Colin stood before him, he was to address him as great older brother. Colin stared in shock and said it might be too much. Yurin raised his sword slightly, a simple gesture asking if Colin truly wished to refuse. Fear flickered through Colin, and he instantly corrected himself, addressing Yurin exactly as ordered. With the spar over, Yurin announced that they were leaving. Colin, still dazed, asked where they were going. Yurin explained that their destination was the Empire, where their youngest brother Rayon lived. Some time later, a shimmering portal inside a soaring magic tower delivered them straight into the Empire's capital. Girinox observed the teleportation with awe, marveling again at how the magic tower could move people across entire nations so effortlessly. Yurin told him that the tower was a neutral force present in every country, a constant and powerful structure shared across the continent. The city around them looked strikingly modern, grand buildings rising everywhere in bold architecture. Their path eventually brought them to the gates of the Empire Knight Academy. Outside it, Yurin told Colin to go fetch Rayon. Colin agreed, only to stop when Yurin gave him a pointed look. Realizing his mistake, he quickly corrected himself and addressed Yurin as great older brother. A short while later, Colin returned with Rayon. Yurin lifted a welcoming hand. Rayon's eyes widened in shock as he took in Yurin's taller, sharper figure. He asked cautiously if this truly was Yurin. Yurin smiled and confirmed it. Rayon said that he had already heard some of what happened from their second brother. Yurin nodded, pleased, and told him they should head home. But Rayon's expression darkened. He said that a serious problem had arisen. The Empire's capital was under emergency lockdown. People could enter, but no one could leave. He explained the reason. At dawn the previous day, the Crown Prince had been assassinated. Yurin's eyes widened at the news. Colin asked for confirmation, and Rayon repeated that the assassination was real and had thrown the capital into chaos. Colin scoffed, saying he couldn't imagine anyone managing such an attack inside a fortified royal castle. At that moment, Yurin sensed something off. He scanned their surroundings and confirmed his suspicion. Guards were everywhere, tense and alert, their patrols doubled. The same heavy question seemed to hang over everyone. How could this have happened? Rayon leaned closer, ready to share a quieter, more unsettling detail. Rumors had already spread through the Empire. Rayon explained that the Crown Prince's fiancée, a princess from a neighboring kingdom, had been visiting for several days. The prince, eager to impress her, had summoned her to the training grounds to display his martial skill. When his performance ended and he walked toward her applause, a jagged stone spike burst from the ground without warning and pierced him clean through. Priests rushed forward, but there was nothing to save. He died instantly. Colin, shocked, asked how magic could be used inside the palace when it was strictly forbidden. Rayon confirmed this and said that was exactly why the Magic Tower elders had been called in. Everything had fallen into chaos, and the idea of the Crown Prince being killed in front of his own fiancée was almost unthinkable. The words stone spear jolted Yurin. He recognized the technique. He knew who used it and, worse, he knew exactly where that assassin should be at this point in the story. They were not supposed to appear this early. Dread crawled up his spine. He tried to steady himself, reminding his racing thoughts that he now had the heavenly martial body. He and the true protagonist still had time to grow, he insisted to himself, even as doubt gnawed at him. Yurin called out to Colin and Rayon. Colin responded brightly, adding great older brother as instructed, which made Rayon stare in confusion. Rayon asked why Colin kept attaching great to Yurin's name. Colin shivered and begged him not to question it. Yurin then asked about the best inns nearby. Rayon listed two, Dragon's Tears and Giant's Oath. Yurin immediately decided on Dragon's Tears. He instructed both of them to request leave, then head to the Magic Tower and file departure applications for all four of them. With the Rock's family name, he assured them, the process would be quick. He told them to wait for him at the inn. When Rayon asked where he was going, Yurin only smiled faintly and said he was off to meet an old friend. As he walked away, He added that they should not bully Jiranox. Both brothers froze at the implication that Yurin actually had friends. Soon after, Yurin stood before a lavish building. From the shadows of a nearby alley, he identified it as Flamberge, a noble exclusive bar with a notorious reputation. He retrieved the outfit he had prepared, then stepped out dressed as a proper noble, one he truly was. He tapped his ring and called for Agnes. Agnes's voice snapped awake, irritated that he had disturbed her. Yurin apologized quickly. He asked her to disguise his face. Agnes, surprised, questioned how he knew the ring even had that function. Yurin said he simply guessed. Agnes then asked whom he wanted to look like. Just then, a nobleman stepped out of the bar. Yurin told her to disguise him as that man. The ring melted into a shimmering gel and splashed across his face, wiping away his features entirely before reshaping them into the exact likeness of the exiting noble. Yurin approached the entrance. The guard stared and said he thought he had just left moments ago. Yurin replied in an easy tone that he simply couldn't resist coming back for more drinks. The guard ushered him inside with a friendly warning not to overdo it. Yurin settled at an empty table among the lively crowd. As Viscount Veer, he was greeted by a waiter who welcomed him back. Yurin told him to bring whatever he had been drinking earlier. Only after the waiter left did Yurin release a quiet sigh of relief. His infiltration had worked. He focused his internal energy, sharpening his hearing until the overlapping conversations separated into clear voices. Gossip, complaints, flattery, hundreds of topics drifted through the air. He honed in on one voice. A girl crying at the bar, lamenting that she had been abandoned, and then learning her former partner had died. She spoke to the bartender, a brown-haired girl confessing her grief while the bartender tried to comfort her. He said that new love helped forget old pain and told her she would find someone better. She thanked him, saying the talk had eased her heart. Yurin kept listening. A sudden idea struck him. Using sound transmission, he directed his voice into her mind, asking if she had enjoyed her time with the Crown Prince. She gasped and demanded to know who was speaking and where they were. A heartbeat later, the entire bar began to shake. The ceiling cracked. The noble's laughter turned into horrified screams. With a deafening collapse, the once grand bar fell into rubble while the untouched buildings on either side only made the destruction more jarring. Yurin burst free of the collapsing structure, landing before the stunned gatekeeper. Terror flooded him as he faced the girl. Stone pillars erupted from the ground around her, merging with her body in monstrous fashion. A system panel appeared before Yurin's eyes. It identified her as envy, one of the 7 deadly sins. Her affection level read murderous intent. Yurin instantly understood she was not human and that she carried terrifying power. Her voice twisted into something hateful as she promised she would tear him apart. Fear surged through Yurin's chest. He wondered if he had any chance of surviving what stood before him. He forced himself to stay steady. He reminded himself that this confrontation was exactly why he had come. He removed his disguise and judged that he first needed a proper weapon. His false middle-aged face peeled away, revealing his true, youthful features. Power gathered in his hand, and he made a mental note that once this was over, they should reclaim the apostle's corpse and forge it into a dagger. Envy's eyes brightened with interest as she watched his transformation. She chuckled that this must be his real form, added that he was surprisingly handsome, and declared that she would take him alive. She lunged forward on her stone limbs, screeching that he would become her prize. Yurin sprinted to meet her, channeling mana into the dark blade. He drove a direct strike toward her chest. The dagger hit her stone shell with a sharp clang and rebounded without leaving a mark. His stomach dropped. The attack had bounced off like nothing. Grinding his teeth, he decided there was no choice but to escalate. He hurled the dagger and unleashed black iron explosion. Black streaks ripped through the air as a pillar of multicolored light descended on Envy, swallowing her in a furious blast. For a breath he staggered back, momentarily convinced he had won, until the fire guttered and a warped voice drifted through the smoke. She stepped out grinning, remarking that the power simply faded and that he wielded some very amusing magic. Yurin's breath hitched. Sweat stung his brow. He realized he had burned through most of his options already. Then he drew a butterfly-shaped talisman, a finishing move strong enough to kill an orc warrior in a single hit. He flung it and activated Bloodfire Palm, then added Curving Shot, sending a storm of blazing orange butterflies spiraling through the night. The fiery insects looped around buildings and slammed against Envy's limbs, erupting in bursts of heat. But inside his mind he keeled over in despair, mumbling that he had drained every scrap of energy and was now completely doomed. In reality, he turned to flee, gasping, only to see Envy still advancing untouched. He muttered a curse as townsfolk screamed and scrambled through the rubble, shouting that a monster had appeared. Watching their panic, he concluded grimly that retreat was not an option. If he ran, more would die. He vowed to hold out until the capital guard arrived. Envy responded with a swarm of stone spears, crimson edges streaking through the air. He kept dodging strike after strike. He exclaimed that the chaos was unreal and realized that if he kept dodging he would be killed. Though he had not mastered his technique, he decided he would trust his sword. He drew a long blade that drank in the moonlight and glowed faintly. He resolved to channel his inner energy directly into it and charged at Envy. Envy snarled that he was coming and launched another barrage. The swordsman met the spears head-on, his aura-coated blade cleaving through them one after another. As shattered stone crashed around him, he grinned through the dust and thought that if he could cut those spears, then he still had a chance. Across the plaza, Envy perched on her stone legs, amused. She said he was entertaining and added that she wanted to see how long he could keep it up. A fresh storm of spears rained down. Yuren raised his sword and braced himself. He noticed with alarm that the number of projectiles kept increasing. Envy laughed as she hurled another volley and taunted him to try blocking it. But in mid-taunt she suddenly stiffened, her voice cracking as she gasped that something was wrong with her body. System windows flashed before Yuren's eyes. He had been poisoning her throughout the fight. The notifications announced that extended poison had activated, that blood venom art had triggered a snake-type toxin, and that fire flame poison was burning through her insides. As she convulsed, he felt a fierce spark of triumph. There was finally a reaction. Another alert said she was paralyzed, but only for 1 second. He was inwardly panicking about how short that paralysis window was. Even so, Yuren knew he could not waste it. He activated Small Dragon's treasure, golden light sparking around his limbs. Empowered, he lunged at the frozen apostle. Envy's eyes widened as he closed in. A message flashed saying paralysis had reached 0, but Yuren was already airborne and urging himself to cut first. His blade carved a glowing arc across her torso, cracking open her stone shell. He hurled his dagger into the gap and released another black iron explosion, pouring in every drop of magic he had left. The dagger detonated inside her. Flame, stone, and dust tore through the street. When the shockwave faded, Yuren stood hunched, using his sword for support. He breathed that at last the attack had landed. He stared hard at the collapsed spider form, wondering if it was finished. The rubble shifted. A slick red mass dragged itself free of the shattered shell. Yuren recoiled, choking out disbelief as the naked flesh core lifted its head and pulsed with blue-black energy. Dark fire wrapped around it while a voice from inside told him to wait. He watched in horror, murmuring that this could not be happening. Then he remembered the truth he had forgotten. Apostles possessed multiple phases. A warning window blared that Envy was awakening into Phase 2, noting that each phase drastically increased power. A new stone body burst from the shell, Envy shouting the arrival of Phase 2 as her heavy legs crashed into the ground. She hummed low, then thrust out her arm and screamed for them to die. Rainbow-edged projectiles tore through the plaza. He dodged with a groan as he realized her attacks had grown far faster and far more chaotic. He ran over broken stone, spears slicing the air behind him. He clenched his jaw and cursed that at this pace he would die. Another streak of killing light whipped toward him. His eyes widened in shock, and the scene dissolved into a spray of red as the night was swallowed by blood. Yuren gasps for air as he twists aside, stone spears ripping past him in violent bursts. Each attack is faster, wilder, stripped of any pattern he can read. He manages to cut a few apart, but the effort is frantic and clumsy. He understands the truth even as he fights it. At this pace, he will die. A spear he never sensed slices the air beside his head, cold enough to numb his skin. Darkness flashes across his vision as blood sprays. His lungs lock, but instinct drags him aside at the last instant. The spear only grazes his shoulder. Pain flares, sharp and burning. He stumbles back, forcing distance, clutching his sword as the realization hits him hard. He almost lost his head. Fear takes over. He turns and runs. His mind screams that one misstep will end everything. He needs to escape. He needs to survive. The moment he flees, rage explodes behind him. The monster snarls, demanding to know where he thinks he is going. A massive spear crashes down ahead of him, shattering the ground and stopping him cold. Another erupts beneath his feet. He barely leaps clear, his boot scraping stone. As he lands, a spear tears past his side, forcing him to dive away with a strained grunt. He has no time to breathe before a barrage rains down again. Grinding his teeth, he spins back toward her as a guttural sound tears from his chest. Then, suddenly, the assault stops. She laughs. The sound is deep, cruel, and pleased. She grins as she taunts him, questioning whether he truly believes escape is possible. His thoughts tangle in confusion as she tells him to struggle as much as he wants. His only response is a bitter curse as night fully claims the city. Elsewhere, a cloaked woman walks alone beneath the dark sky, her steps calm despite the rising chaos. Shouts echo through the streets. Someone screams that a monster has appeared and that the guards are needed. The noise draws her attention. Ahead, several men argue in panic. One tries to calm the other, demanding an explanation. The terrified man stammers that something covered in stone spears appeared in the southern district. She listens, her expression tightening as she silently names the creature. Envy. Immediately, she rejects the thought, it should not exist. The men argue on, one doubting the claim, the other insisting it is true. They begin to speculate nervously, wondering if it could be the crown prince. Suddenly, they freeze. The cloaked woman vanishes in a blur, one of them screams. She reappears atop a tall building, scanning the city. In the distance, violent light flashes and thunder roars. Her gaze locks onto it. That is the place. She leaps, her movement briefly revealing the tattoo etched along her body before she disappears into the night. Back in the ruined streets, Yurin continues dodging every strike thrown at him. Each failure sharpens Envy's irritation. Her annoyance twists into a grin as she decides to end this. She hurls another spear, faster than anything before. Yurin tightens his grip as several spears rush him at once. His breath stutters. Fear and fury collide in his chest. He wonders if this is the moment he dies. His body freezes as the spears close in, too fast to escape. A system window erupts into view. It declares a true life or death crisis and announces the unlocking of two special privileges. The first states that Heavenly Eye has evolved into Creator's gaze, allowing him to see attack trajectories. Yurin's eyes widen in shock. The world shifts. The spears slow, their paths burning clearly into his mind. Every arc and angle unfolds with perfect clarity. He steps aside from the first strike with ease, following the guidance instinctively. Another comes, and he dodges again. He realizes that once the path is visible, evasion becomes simple. Two spears spiral toward him in a deceptive pattern, but their trickery collapses under his gaze. He slips past them with minimal movement. A breathless grin spreads across his face. He realizes that with mastery, he could evade attacks effortlessly. Envy's fury spikes. She grits her teeth in rage. The system flashes again. The second privilege announces the opening of the Realm of Ascension, a state that activates just before death and is time-limited. Power floods Yurin's body. His sword ignites as his inner strength surges to its absolute peak. White energy gathers along the blade, shimmering fiercely. He wonders briefly what kind of power it is, then dismisses the thought. It is enough. He can win. Across the street, a mother and child watch from their window. The child tugs at her sleeve, eyes wide, whispering that the Knight of Light has appeared as Yurin raises his glowing sword. Envy attacks first. Yurin moves at the same instant. Lightning seems to tear through his limbs as he cuts through her barrage and closes the distance. His speed distorts the air. Panic flashes across Envy's face. She freezes, screaming in disbelief as if facing a ghost. Yurin hovers before her, cold and merciless. He brings the blade down with blinding force, demanding she endure it. The strike cleaves through her completely, tearing her head from her body. A white explosion detonates outward, ripping the battlefield apart. The mother and child stare in stunned silence. The child breathes that the Knight of Light has defeated the monster. Yurin stands trembling amid the ruins, sweat pouring, breath ragged. He wonders if it is truly over. The system flickers, informing him that his power and stamina are fully depleted. He exhales sharply, realizing he survived only because the privileges activated in time. He looks around, thinking about escape before the guards arrive, forcing himself to move. Then the air shifts. His senses snap tight. He turns and freezes. Dark energy churns nearby, twisting the air as it pulls together. Recognition hits him hard. The remains are moving. They are reforming at terrifying speed. The system flashes a warning. Envy has entered Phase 3. The final version has appeared. Yurin stares as a new head forms. Envy snarls, calling him a bastard, grinning with raw excitement as she promises he will not escape this time. Yurin grinds his teeth as despair settles in his chest. He knows he is finished. Worse still, he realizes he never even had the chance to repay him. Envy's rage explodes, her body swelling until she towers over the ruins. With a shaking, broken voice, she declares that she will kill everyone, repeating the vow like a beast barely holding itself together. Dark energy hums across her massive form as she fixes her gaze on Yurin. Yurin stares up at her in disbelief. Her size alone crushes his spirit. His thoughts feel empty as he realizes his inner force is completely drained. He wonders if this truly is the end. A stone spear tears toward him, stopping only inches from his face. With no strength left to dodge, he remains frozen, teeth clenched as fear locks him in place. Death feels unavoidable. Suddenly, Envy's body jerks violently. An external force yanks her backward, stopping the attack. She growls in frustration and demands to know what is happening. She struggles, but living restraints coil tighter around her limbs, sealing her mouth and trapping her countless stone spears. The woman from earlier stands behind her, calmly controlling the bindings. Envy recognizes her and tries to shout through the restraints, furiously questioning whether the woman cannot see what is in front of them. The woman sharply calls Envy by name and orders her to stop, her voice filled with killing intent. She insists that this is not the time for them to reveal themselves. Yurin instantly recognizes the woman as he watches her drag Envy backward across the rooftop. Envy thrashes and struggles, still demanding answers. Yurin mutters under his breath, recalling that he encountered that same being after leaving the Divine Dragon Palace. His system window appears and identifies her as one of the 7 deadly sins. Lust. He repeats the name in disbelief. Lust pauses and turns to look at him, her gaze cold and unreadable. Confusion twists inside him. If this is not the time to reveal themselves, then they are retreating. Lust turns away, tightens the bindings, mutters that it is time to move, and drags Envy with her before leaping off the building. Yurin watches them disappear and finally exhales shakily, realizing he is still alive. A sudden sound makes him turn. He spots approaching guards and immediately decides that staying would only cause trouble. Slipping into a shadowed alley, he avoids them until night fades into morning. At a hotel later that day, someone greets him cheerfully and calls him young lord, saying he has finally returned. Yurin answers tiredly and asks if anything happened overnight and whether Colin and Leon are still asleep. The attendant excitedly reports that a terrorist appeared in the city during the night and that the 2 brothers rushed out at dawn to catch the culprit. Yurin sighs, removes his cape, and thinks that children are reckless. He dismisses the attendant and collapses onto the bed, saying he needs sleep. As he drifts off, his thoughts return to the battle. It was brutal, but it pushed him forward. His system window appears. 10,000 Poison's body scripture. 4 stars. He acknowledges the breakthrough but realizes how lacking he still is. He remembers failing to truly defeat envy, the weakest of the 7 deadly sins. Lust's words echo in his mind. When the time comes, far greater horrors will emerge. He sits up, crosses his legs, and begins circulating his energy, muttering that he must grow stronger, faster. Resolve burns in his eyes. Later that morning, Leon announces that he heard the murderer of the Crown Prince appeared in the city. Colin complains that if he had been there, he would have caught them. Leon corrects him, explaining that the assassin was a monster beyond human, with stone erupting from its body and buildings collapsing everywhere. Leon hesitates, then explains that a Knight of Light appeared and destroyed the monster with a glowing sword before vanishing. Colin marvels, wishing for a title like that and wondering who the knight was. Yurin yawns quietly and thinks that the knight is sitting right there. He asks about their departure application. Leon reports it was approved, and Colin adds that the Rock family name helped. Yurin urges them to leave immediately, warning that lingering could be dangerous. They pack and depart through a teleportation tower, returning to their county. At the Rock estate, their father greets them with laughter and open arms. Leon leaps into his embrace, and their father remarks proudly that he has grown. Yurin and Colin bow deeply and announce their return. Their father welcomes them warmly and says he heard something major happened in the Empire, but tells them to rest first and talk later. Later, in the estate, someone greets Yurin warmly and praises him for returning stronger with 2 new titles. Yurin is confused as she explains that he earned Iron Magician at Aussie Castle and Rookie Slayer in the capital. She reminds him that he defeated 4 rising talents at the academy, earning the nickname. He winces in embarrassment. He starts to mention gifts for her and Clyde, but is interrupted when Peru rushes in and announces that the Marquis has summoned all 3 brothers to dinner. That evening, seated with their father, he asks if they have rested. After they confirm, he gets straight to the point. He declares that the trial to determine the successor will now begin. Their father, the Marquis, speaks with the authority of generations as he reminds them that the Rox family follows a strict rule. The eldest son inherits the title. Under normal circumstances, he says that Yurin would already be named successor, noting that he himself became heir at an even younger age. However, his tone hardens as he adds that Yurin squandered too many vital years. Because of that failure, he had intended to choose Colin instead. Still, he acknowledges that Yurin has finally awakened and begun acting responsibly. For this reason, he declares that he will no longer decide the matter himself. With cold seriousness, he tells them that they will prove through action who deserves the position. Silence fills the dining hall as Colin and Leon steel themselves. Yurin casually asks how the decision will be made. The Marquis rises and explains that, since no precedent exists, the trial will be divided into stages. The first is territorial defense. Standing by the window, he reminds them that fully grown monsters will soon migrate toward the coast. If not eliminated swiftly, their people will suffer heavy losses. He declares that each brother will be sent to a separate battle zone and must demonstrate his full capability. To ensure fairness, a steward will be assigned to each of them to observe and report objectively. Then he adds that they may use anything at their disposal. When Yurin repeats the word anything, the Marquis confirms it fully. Strength, wealth, influence, gathered forces, and borrowed power are all allowed. Colin reacts with excitement, asking if this is truly permitted. Their father responds that they are not aiming to become knights, but a Marquis. He emphasizes that while strength matters, leadership demands far more. If they are capable, they may even borrow knight orders. Only results will be judged. Yurin calmly says he understands. Colin agrees just as firmly. Their father returns to his seat and signals for dinner to continue. Chefs enter with covered dishes, and Leon brightens instantly. The Marquis proudly announces that he prepared the family's original terrain soup to welcome his sons home. As the lids lift, Yurin exhales in quiet dread while Leon laughs eagerly. Their father urges them to eat well and reminds them that deployment begins in 1 month. They must prepare with everything they have. The next morning, Yurin is asked whether he plans to prepare. As he fastens his shirt, he replies that he lacks nothing in particular. Peru exclaims that the other young masters are already mobilizing, especially Colin, and that the Livingtine family is sending him support. Yurin recalls that Livingtine is Lady Kenna's birth family and understands where her loyalty lies. He tells Peru that the Marquis ordered them to achieve the best results. When Peru asks what that means, Yurin explains that whether they borrow knight orders or slaughter monsters alone, only the number of kills matters. Peru stiffens uneasily but admits he is right. Yurin adds lightly that his own support is already coming, friends who will help him wipe everything out. A knock interrupts them. Aaron and Clyde enter, and Yurin greets them warmly, saying he has gifts. He calls Clyde forward and explains the tradition of a lord gifting a sword to his knight. He hands Clyde a long sword. As Clyde takes it, warmth spreads across the blade and flames crawl along its edge. He realizes the heat does not burn and asks what kind of flame it is. Yurin explains that it is fire from a flame spirit. Clyde tests the balance and says it feels light and perfect. Yurin knows the sword has accepted him and advises him to speak with it often to awaken its full power. Aaron watches in confusion until Yurin calls her forward. He hands her a sword as well. Wind energy surges through the blade, lifting her hair as she recognizes a wind spirit. She blurts out that the sword likes her, leaving everyone stunned. She asks to test it immediately, and Clyde asks the same. Yurin grants permission. Clyde challenges Aaron to spar, but she cuts him off, saying he still has far to go, and they rush out together. Yurin laughs softly while Peru stares in disbelief, muttering about spirit swords and admitting his jealousy. Yurin promises him something good later, but first says he must repay a debt. Soon after, piles of gold fill Yurin's table. Peru stammers in shock as Yurin reminds him he promised repayment. Peru declares that Yurin must be a genius in both dark magic and gambling. Yurin quickly denies it and explains the money is for buying poisons. Peru immediately offers his full help. Later, Yurin meets Jerinox at the blacksmith workshop. Jerinox thanks him for treating him well, and Yurin tells him that the 2 swords he purchased have found their masters. Jerinox is stunned, admitting he feared they were failures. Yurin dismisses that, praising them as mastercrafted blades that choose their wielders. Jerinox thanks him sincerely, then grows serious. He says he has been thinking deeply and must warn Yurin of a serious problem within the Marquis household. The words hit Yurin hard, leaving him frozen in shock. Sometime later, inside the estate, the Marquis demands to know what Yurin is talking about, suspicion sharp in his voice as he presses for an explanation. Yurin answers calmly that if his father grants him authorization, then everything will become clear. The Marquis immediately objects, insisting that permits are not handed out lightly and that he must know their purpose first. Yurin does not argue. Instead, he simply addresses him as father. The single word halts the Marquis, silence stretching as his thoughts churn. When Yurin speaks again, his tone darkens and his eyes harden. He states that ever since the day he was struck down by Ilya and disgraced himself, he does not believe he has once disappointed his father again. He asks him to trust him this time as well, promising firmly that he will not be let down. The Marquis studies him for a long moment before releasing a slow, resigned sigh. He says that if Yurin is speaking with such seriousness, then he will allow it. He adds that the butler will be informed and that Yurin can collect the authorization tomorrow. There is one condition. The permit will only be valid for 24 hours. Relief softens Yurin's expression. He thanks his father, bows formally, and leaves. The Marquis dismisses him with a short reply and watches him go, a faint smile lingering on Yurin's face. Alone, the Marquis mutters that being called father truly weakens the heart. He wonders briefly if Yurin is about to stir up trouble, then reassures himself that one day should not cause disaster. The next morning, a voice calls for the young master. Inside his room, Yurin stands fully dressed, adjusting his tie, as Peru reports that men carrying boxes are waiting at the entrance and claim they were sent by the Marquis. Yurin pauses, then smiles with satisfaction, saying the timing is perfect. Peru asks what he means. Yurin orders him to send all male servants to the entrance, instructing them to move everything directly to Armory No. 1. Peru stammers, asking if he truly means all of them. Yurin replies lightly that he still has something else to retrieve and tells Peru to meet him at the armory. Confused but obedient, Peru agrees. Outside the estate, the butler approaches and hands Yurin the permit, explaining that the Marquis ordered it delivered. Yurin accepts it, checks it briefly, and then asks where the Marquis is. The butler hesitates before explaining that the Marchioness has arrived and that they are having tea together. Yurin considers this, then tells the butler to deliver a message. The Marquis is to bring an inspector and come to Armory No. 1 by noon. The butler freezes, stammering as he tries to confirm the instruction. Yurin ignores the hesitation and warns that failure to deliver the message properly will have consequences. At the armory building, guards stop Yurin and warn him that unauthorized personnel are forbidden entry. Calmly, Yurin gestures behind him and asks whether they see the stacked boxes. When the guard confirms it, Yurin explains that they contain weapons and armor purchased from Aussie Castle for the expedition. He states that both he and the men transporting the supplies need to enter and orders the door opened. The guard trembles and replies that the armory manager must be present. Yurin smiles and agrees, remarking that of course the manager should be here. He then adds calmly that the manager must already be on the way. As unease spreads across the guard's face, Yurin points toward the building and notes that if anything unusual occurs in the armory, the manager would naturally rush over. Moments later, the armory manager comes sprinting toward them, breath ragged, demanding to know what is happening. When he arrives, Yurin explains without urgency that he has brought equipment for storage and orders the door opened. The manager apologizes but insists authorization is required. Yurin replies smoothly that he expected that response and produces the permit. He instructs the manager to open the door. Reluctantly, the manager agrees, stressing that only storage is permitted and nothing else may be touched. The boxes are carried inside. Yurin adopts a bored expression and complains that he is bored, casually suggesting they inspect a weapon. He orders that one existing box be brought out. The manager panics, urgently objecting that inspection requires special authorization. Yurin smiles and says he only needs to see one. Relieved, the manager agrees and brings out a box himself. The lid is opened, revealing several swords. Yurin asks Jaranox about their condition. Jaranox inspects one carefully and reports that most appear serviceable. Yurin reacts with exaggerated surprise and praises the manager, saying he has clearly done excellent work and should be reported to the Marquis. The manager laughs nervously and tries to wave it off. Yurin's smile sharpens as he declares this is good, then orders every remaining box to be brought out. The manager's face drains of color. He throws himself forward, shouting that this is overstepping authority. Before he can finish, Yurin strikes him with the hand holding the permit, sending him crashing to the ground. Yurin roars that the manager has no right to speak of overstepping and demands whether he cannot see the permit, accusing him of always trying to be clever. At that moment, the Marquis arrives with an inspector and the Marchioness. He calls Yurin's name sharply and demands an explanation. Yurin straightens and states coldly that the armory has been emptied, inviting his father to verify it himself. The Marquis opens a box and lifts a sword. The blade crumbles in his hand. He stares in disbelief, then demands to know if this is meant to be a weapon. He turns furiously on the inspector, reminding him that only a month ago he reported no issues during the audit. The inspector panics and accuses the manager, insisting he must be responsible. Yurin cuts him off sharply, asking whether he truly believes one man could smuggle out this much equipment in a single month. He releases crushing pressure, stating that such theft is impossible without permission. The inspector collapses, gasping and begging for mercy as the pressure lifts. The Marquis demands an explanation. Yurin answers that now his father understands why the permit was necessary. He states that this rod extends beyond this armory to others and even to the food stores. He asks what will happen in the coming years if this continues. Even if they survive this expedition, the future is already ruined. While those at the top eat well and wield fine weapons, soldiers will be forced to fight with worthless blades and consume poison supplies. As silence grips everyone present, Yurin declares with burning fury that he will never forgive anyone who toys with human lives. Soon after, Yurin announces that the chest set aside contains swords, armor, and shields purchased through his blacksmith from Aussie Castle, emphasizing that their quality is flawless. He tells his father to discard anything unusable and replace it with these supplies. His tone then hardens. With sharpened gravity, he states that the corruption uncovered likely involves far more people than first expected, and he requests that everyone connected to the two exposed individuals be punished without exception. The Marquis stares at him in disbelief, calling his name and demanding to know what kind of person he has become. Yurin lowers his head in a respectful bow and calmly states that, in that case, he will take his leave. He turns and walks away, leaving the others frozen. As he goes, he reflects that this is as far as he can interfere. Anything beyond this point falls under the Marquis's authority. What remains is his father's responsibility. Several days later, back at the estate, Yurin is summoned. He stands behind the Marquis and asks whether he was called. Without turning, the Marquis replies that thanks to Yurin, the corruption was uncovered, and he felt it proper to explain how the matter concluded. Yurin understands at once and acknowledges it quietly. Over tea, the Marquis admits that Yurin was right. He explains that not only the first armory, but the others as well, along with the food stores, were deeply corrupted. The number of people involved was staggering. What shocked him most was not the common soldiers or servants, but figures he trusted for years, such as the weapons steward and the inspector. His voice tightens as he admits that people who had served beside him for over a decade were involved, and that it truly broke his heart. Yurin, eyes sharp, asks whether everyone was truly identified. The Marquis replies that the steward and inspector confessed with unnatural honesty, even volunteering information that was never asked for, making the investigation disturbingly easy. Yurin listens without reaction, noting inwardly that the confession draft poison worked exactly as intended. The Marquis sets down his cup and says the incident made him realize many things. Straightening, he recalls how shortly after becoming Marquis, the former king reprimanded him publicly before many nobles, leaving him deeply humiliated. He admits that Yurin's words days ago struck even deeper, humiliating him far more thoroughly. Still facing away, he says that Yurin spoke the truth and had even prepared a solution in advance. Yurin calls out uneasily, but the Marquis continues, stating that he himself was a disappointment. Then, unexpectedly, he asks Yurin to forgive him. The words leave Yurin frozen. The Marquis turns back toward his seat and apologizes for being such a disgraceful father. Yurin stares, stunned, thoughts racing, then responds firmly that this is not the case. The Marquis turns in surprise. Yurin smiles brightly and gestures to himself, explaining that he spent years causing trouble before finally coming to his senses. He adds that all humans make mistakes. The Marquis grits his teeth and mutters with a strained smile that Yurin's tongue has finally surpassed his own. Yurin replies lightly that his father flatters him too much. Exhaling, the Marquis declares that he will never repeat the same mistake again. That night, someone urgently calls for Yurin. Inside the room, sealed containers are presented as Yurin announces that the poison has arrived. His system window appears, displaying its details. A neurotoxin derived from steel cap mushrooms that induces paralysis and respiratory failure. Yurin grips the bottle, excitement flashing through him as he notes that aquatic monsters would struggle to breathe on land. He praises the result aloud. Peru hesitates, then asks whether Yurin has heard the recent news. Yurin turns sharply and demands clarification. Peru excitedly explains that Yurin's popularity outside the estate has surged. Unease rises in Yurin as he questions what popularity even means, insisting it must be a misunderstanding. Peru continues, explaining that while procuring the poison, he heard Yurin's name everywhere. The people are talking about him. When pressed, Peru recounts that the territory was deeply moved by Yurin's declaration that he cared for the soldiers more than anyone except the Marquis. They were touched that he spent his own money to buy armor and shields for them. Yurin mutters uneasily that his reputation as a delinquent should not vanish so easily. Peru adds that some townsfolk are even trying to volunteer for Yurin's unit. He praises Yurin as a genius and asks if he planned this all along, stating that recruitment will now be effortless. Yurin groans, clutching his head, waves Peru away, and tells him to leave. Peru bows, still amazed, and exits. Alone, Yurin sighs and admits inwardly that his improving reputation is a development he never anticipated. Shrugging it off, he decides to develop more poison anyway. That night, he begins. As he consumes steel cap mushroom blossoms, poison, his system floods him with notifications. The 10,000 poisons body scripture absorbs it, unlocking a new trait. 100 poisons immunity. Another message states that all pain and symptoms from poison are removed. The realization jolts him awake mid-meditation. Seated in a lotus position, he examines himself and realizes absorbing poison no longer hurts at all. It feels natural. He resumes meditation, marveling at the trait's power. By morning, a new system window appears. A new poison is unlocked. Hagen's Serpent Bane, a neurotoxin capable of killing Gon, a legendary sea creature. Even trace amounts can kill a human without leaving evidence. Yurin stares in disbelief. He intended to unlock a weaker poison, yet gained an advanced one instead. As he dresses, he wonders whether the scripture has reached the intermediate tier, and whether stronger cultivation unlocks stronger poisons. A slow smile forms. Peru arrives, and Yurin hands him a list, instructing him to prepare the poisons immediately. Peru agrees, then breaks into a sweat upon reading the long list. Yurin confirms this is intentional, reflecting that money is abundant and, with poison immunity, absorption is effortless. He decides to push the scripture to 5 stars before the campaign. Time passes. The departure ceremony arrives. Outside the estate, Yurin stands before the troops he assembled. His brothers stand before their own forces. The difference is obvious. Peru whispers anxiously, asking if they will truly be fine. Yurin asks what he means. Peru gestures toward the massive knight orders backing the other heirs and points out that Yurin has only Aaron and Clyde. He asks why Yurin refused volunteers. Yurin grins and says he has a plan. Mocking laughter erupts behind him as Colin and Leon laugh openly. Anger flares, and Yurin mutters that they need a lesson. Peru panics and begs him to restrain himself. Before anything escalates, a loud announcement declares the Marquis's arrival. The troops rise as the Marquis steps forward. He announces that he will stand where the danger is greatest, leading from the front, and commands them to defend their land. A thunderous roar answers him. Watching, Yurin smiles faintly and thinks that it has begun. The campaign starts. Each heir is assigned a defensive sector. 2 days later, Yurin arrives at his post. Before a castle gate, he orders it opened and introduces himself. A wall steward named Hans greets him, then falters as he sees the tiny force behind Yurin. He asks hesitantly whether this is truly everyone. Yurin tilts his head innocently and asks why. Hans explains nervously that hundreds of Valaks attack every year, and that such numbers are impossible to hold back with so few troops. Sweat beads on his face as he asks one final time whether reinforcements are still coming. The steward explains grimly that within days the entire coastline will be flooded with marine monsters like Bolax. He warns that their sheer numbers could overwhelm the walls and gates if they advance together. He insists that the only option is to push beyond the walls and thin them out early, then panics and blurts out that with only 5 knights, stopping them is impossible. The young lord remains silent, his expression unreadable, answering only with a long pause. The steward suddenly shouts that it is not 5 people after all. Still sweating, he hurriedly apologizes and trails off in confusion. The young lord smiles calmly and gestures to the side, explaining that the man standing there is the marquise's butler sent to observe him, and also his own butler. The orange-haired attendant forces out an awkward laugh. The young lord then states plainly that his only knights are the 2 behind him, Aaron and Clyde, and adds that what matters is what comes next. He points directly at Clyde and says that Clyde alone will handle the fighting, so there is no need to worry. Clyde flinches and stammers in disbelief, asking if he heard correctly and how that is even possible. Dread tightens his face as he wonders how he could manage that alone. The young lord steps forward and grips Clyde's shoulder with heavy emphasis, calling his name and telling him to trust him. He states that Clyde possesses dormant potential and declares with dangerous certainty that the power is there and will be drawn out now. He proclaims that the time has come to awaken the berserker within him. At the fortress, the young lord calls for Hans and requests 2 training swords. On the shoreline below the walls, he lays out the schedule, stating that until the monsters arrive, Aaron and Clyde will spar continuously throughout the day. He orders them to fight once, rest for an hour, then repeat, and asks if that is understood. He stops Aaron briefly and says he has something to ask before she begins. Aaron responds obediently. He asks how sparring with Clyde usually goes. After a moment, she admits honestly that she wins without much difficulty. The young lord's smile sharpens as he says that means she has been holding back. Aaron falls silent. He explains that until now there was no reason to go all out, but from this match onward, she must use 100% of her strength and crush Clyde completely. Aaron blurts out her surprise, but the young lord continues, instructing her to beat him so badly that he feels the gap carved into his bones. He says it is fine if she beats him to a pulp, because this is how Clyde's potential will surface. He tells her again to trust him. On the beach, Aaron and Clyde face each other with training swords. Clyde roars for her to prepare herself and charges forward, aura raging violently around him. Watching from above, the young lord murmurs in mild surprise, wondering since when Clyde became so skilled at controlling his aura. Clyde attacks first, heat and pressure spiraling around his swing. Aaron meets him head-on, then slips past the strike at the last instant. Her blade flashes, and she cuts cleanly across his flank in a single line. Clyde chokes and buckles, coughing as the blow drops him to one knee. Aaron steadies herself with a strained breath as Clyde admits defeat in a broken voice. From the wall, the young lord watches with a drink in hand and murmurs that the sight gives him goosebumps. His gaze fixes on Aaron as he notes that her abilities are absurdly high. A status window confirms her traits, and he realizes her clear mirror, still water, has risen far more than he expected. He observes that she is not just fast, but reading sword paths and responding instantly. To him, it feels like watching a child fight an adult. The sparring continues. In the second match, Aaron strikes low and twists Clyde's body with a brutal hit. The third match ends before he can recover. The fights pile up until the ninth, with Clyde reeling repeatedly, reduced to pure defense. Beside the young lord, the butler gawks and comments that Aaron is completely overwhelming him. The young lord offers no response. Below, Clyde kneels in the sand, trembling and panting. He stares at the ground, whispering in disbelief that the gap is truly this vast. Someone calls out that Clyde has had enough for the day. Clyde blurts out for the young lord, shaken, questioning whether it is even possible for him. He admits that he could not touch even the edge of her clothing and asks how the young lord can claim he has hidden potential. The young lord snorts and says he already told him it was hidden. He asks sharply whether Clyde expected it to emerge easily, then orders him to trust him and keep sparring. Time passes. Day 2 arrives with Aaron still crushing Clyde with efficient strikes. Day 3 follows, her blade snapping into him again and again. After the repetition, the young lord sits alone, cross-legged, breathing calmly. A soldier suddenly rushes in and shouts that there is a serious problem. The young lord asks calmly what it is. The soldier blurts out that it is finally happening and that the Bolaks are rising. They hurry to the wall. The soldier points to the sea as the water breaks and round-headed monsters surface, red eyes glaring and jagged teeth bared as they rise in swarms. The young lord watches without panic and remarks casually that it has been a while since he saw them, even calling them cute little Bolaks. As the monsters gather, he asks where Clyde is. Aaron hesitates, then explains that Clyde lost earlier and is still sitting on the beach. The young lord smiles with satisfaction and orders her to deliver something to him. On the sand, Clyde is collapsed forward, sobbing and shaking as despair swallows him. He admits to himself that he must be hopeless. Aaron approaches and calls his name. He weakly responds. She struggles under the weight of what she is carrying and says the sword is extremely heavy. She explains that the young lord ordered Clyde to take it and adds that the Bolaks are coming and that he is to fight them. Clyde freezes in shock. When he looks up, the beach is already crawling with a massive wave of monsters. Aaron adds that there is more. She delivers the message exactly as told, instructing him to surrender his body to the smoke, then says the young lord told her to leave him there afterward. Clyde cries out in disbelief, but Aaron is already running away, shouting that she will return if it gets dangerous. Clyde reaches after her, panic breaking his voice as he stares at the endless monsters. He gasps that it is too much and wonders how he is supposed to win. High on the wall, the observers tense. One thinks about calling reinforcements, another wonders what Clyde will do. At the center of them all, the young lord stands unmoving, his expression unreadable, offering only silence.
Since the first 2 steps were already complete, Yurin proceeds to activate his soul, killing smoke, an ability that has reached level 2. The power releases a hallucinogenic mist that spreads across a chosen area, seeping into the air and attacking the mind by stirring fear and confusion. The smoke quickly envelops the ground where Clyde is standing, curling around him without warning. As Clyde notices the mist closing in, his irritation sharpens and his anxiety begins to spiral. Not long after, the hallucinations take hold. Clyde starts seeing distorted visions, one of which shows Aaron telling him that Yurin has ordered him to submit to the smoke. Before he can process that, the scenery shifts, dragging him back into memories from his childhood. He sees himself as a small boy, frozen in place as his father strikes his mother right in front of him. In the memory, the younger Clyde cries and begs his father to stop. His father ignores the pleas, shoves him aside, and mockingly asks what he thinks he can do about it. He says that if the situation feels so unfair, then Clyde should grow stronger and defeat him. The boy collapses in tears, apologizes to his mother, and silently makes a vow to become strong enough to protect her one day. As Clyde relives the moment, tears roll uncontrollably down his face. His emotions surge when another hallucination replaces the scene. This time, Aaron appears, defeating him again and again. She mocks him for being unable to even brush her clothes and questions how someone so weak could ever believe he might grow stronger. She declares that he will never become powerful. Clyde tries to deny her words, but before he can form a response, another vision emerges. Yurin appears and offers an apology, saying that he misjudged Clyde. He claims that Clyde never had any real potential to begin with. He calls him weak and frail and states coldly that he will remain that way forever. Clyde breaks down, sobbing as he insists that those words are lies. His denial is drowned out when images of his younger self and his wounded, crying mother appear once more. The sight overwhelms him. The child reminds him of the promise he made to become stronger, while his mother begs him to protect her. Then Aaron and Yurin return together in his vision, ridiculing him. They call him a weakling who cannot even touch Aaron's clothes. Yurin adds that Clyde will be weak for the rest of his life. Clyde desperately rejects their words, repeating that they are not true. When a berserker sinks into overwhelming sorrow and fear, that is the moment when their true rage is born. The smoke continues to thicken, spreading further than before. Commander Hans watches in alarm as the mist grows denser, but suddenly, without warning, it begins to fade. Both Hans and Yurin are caught off guard by the sudden change. Hans demands to know what is happening. Yurin responds with a calm smile, saying that the process has been successful. In the original novel, Clyde awakened his berserker trait after losing the people closest to him. This time, even though the tragedy was artificially created, the result is the same. The awakening has occurred. Clyde now stands radiating fury, his eyes unfocused and his awareness dulled. Seeing his strange behavior, Commander Hans asks why Clyde seems so different. In response, Yurin raises his hand and withdraws the remaining soul, killing smoke. As the mist clears completely, Clyde notices the approaching bulwarks. An overwhelming aura bursts from him, so intense that even the monsters react to it. Yurin smiles and tells Clyde to take up the flame spirit sword and drive the enemies back. Clyde surges forward without hesitation, cutting into the bulwarks and overpowering them with frightening ease. Commander Hans watches in disbelief and asks how Clyde can fight so many enemies at once. Clyde continues his assault, forcing the bulwarks into a full retreat. Hans is left stunned, unable to believe that Kryde confronted them alone and emerged victorious. Yurin calmly reminds him that he had already said Kryde could handle the battle by himself. Most of the bulwarks are either defeated or fleeing. However, as Yurin surveys the situation, he realizes that one serious problem remains. Because Kryde's awakening was artificially induced, his mind may not be fully under his control. After driving the monsters away, Kryde turns his attention toward the wall where Yurin and Eren are standing. He begins moving toward them with clear hostility. Just as Yurin expected, Kryde now views them as enemies as well. They need to restrain him without causing injury. Yurin knows how difficult that will be, but Eren steps forward and states that she will handle it herself. Yurin looks at her in confusion and asks if she is confident she can subdue Kryde without harming him after witnessing his overwhelming strength. Eren answers that although she does not know exactly what Yurin did to him, Kryde's sword path has not changed. Because of that, she believes she can stop him. Hearing this, Yurin begins to sweat slightly, then nods and agrees to her plan. Still trapped in his berserk state, Kryde heads straight toward Yurin and Eren with the clear intent to defeat them as well. Eren steps down onto the shore, positioning herself to intercept him before he reaches the others. As she draws her sword, she calmly praises Kryde for his efforts in defeating the bulwarks and states that she will now subdue him while keeping the pain to a minimum. None of her words reach him. Kryde charges at her and swings his flame sword with full force, but she effortlessly avoids the strike. He immediately follows with another attack, yet once again fails to connect as she leaps into the air, propelled by the power of the wind spirit. The sight leaves Yurin deeply shocked, and she wonders when Eren became capable of using the wind spirit at such an advanced level. Commander Hans can only stare with his mouth hanging open, completely stunned by what he is witnessing. Kryde grows even angrier as his attacks continue to miss, and he strikes again with even greater strength. This time, however, his blade cuts through nothing but an afterimage created by the wind spirit. In the next instant, Eren appears behind him and strikes him with the back of her sword, carefully avoiding serious harm. The blow sends Kryde crashing to the ground. He cries out in pain, then collapses, exhausted and disoriented, unable to continue fighting. Eren withdraws her sword and informs Yurin that Kryde has been subdued successfully without suffering any serious injuries. The sight leaves not only Peru and Hans stunned, but even Yurin feels genuine surprise. He realizes at that moment just how powerful Eren truly is, far beyond what he had initially assumed. Yurin then calls out to Hans and remarks that the current situation is completely different from what Hans had reported earlier. Hans explains that what he said before was true based on past experiences. He says that normally, once monsters begin appearing, they flood in endlessly for the entire day, never allowing the defenders even a moment to rest. He adds that this is the first time something so abnormal has happened, where the monsters suddenly stop coming. After listening carefully and fully grasping the situation, Yurin turns his attention to the butler and asks how the success of this mission is evaluated. The butler explains that the primary method is based on the number of monsters defeated, followed by the strength of those monsters. He further explains that the evaluation also considers whether the city walls were perfectly defended and whether allied casualties were minimized. Once Yurin understands all the conditions, he concludes that aside from the unusually low monster count, everything else has gone almost perfectly. This conclusion confuses the butler, who comments that it should be worrying that no additional monsters are approaching. Yurin responds calmly, saying that while it is indeed unfortunate, there is nothing that can be done. He adds that a single expedition does not determine who will ultimately become the successor anyway. The butler is visibly impressed by how composed Yurin remains even in such circumstances and comments that Yurin has truly changed a great deal. Sometime later, Kryde finally regains consciousness. He looks around with a confused expression before noticing Eren standing in front of him. He asks her what he had been doing, and why everyone is staring at him so seriously. Eren realizes that Kryde has fully come back to his senses, but she can tell that he has no clear memory of what happened. She asks him whether he truly remembers nothing, then explains that he defeated the Volux entirely on his own, and says that his performance was incredibly impressive. Hearing this, Kryde becomes completely shocked and is overwhelmed by disbelief at what she tells him. After a moment, Kryde asks why the back of his head feels strangely cold and uncomfortable. Eren ignores the question and instead tells him to stop worrying, pull himself together, and go eat with everyone else. Still rubbing the back of his head in confusion, Kryde stands up and decides to follow Eren, unable to understand what really happened. Suddenly, Hans notices movement in the distance and shouts a warning that another monster is approaching. Yurin immediately asks where it is, and Hans identifies the creatures by the size of their fins, recognizing them as sharkrai. He explains that they are marine monsters standing over 2 meters tall. Each sharkrai has the head of a shark and limbs with terrifying physical strength. Hans explains that they devour their prey whole using razor-sharp teeth, making close combat extremely dangerous due to their massive natural weapons. He stresses that extreme caution is required when dealing with them. He adds that they possess physical abilities such as Rage and Steel Fangs, along with support-type skills like reinforcement and acceleration, which make them even more lethal in battle. Urine reacts with visible excitement upon hearing this description, which only heightens Hans's fear. Hans urgently tells Urine not to speak so lightly, explaining that each Sharkrai has combat power equal to, or even exceeding that of a high-ranking knight. The butler adds that there has never been a recorded case of more than 50 Sharkrai appearing at once. He explains that under normal circumstances, defeating that many would require the full military strength of the Marquis family. The butler states that the situation can no longer be considered a simple test and advises Urine to abandon the location and retreat immediately for safety. The focus then shifts to Urine's knights, who are positioned much closer to the advancing monsters. Gripping his sword tightly, Clyde asks Aaron what they should do, noting that the monsters are advancing far faster than the Volux from earlier. Urine considers the situation carefully and says that it would be difficult to hold them back with only Clyde and Aaron. Hans, already shaking with fear, asks what Urine means by that. Urine then reveals that he intends to step in personally this time. His words shock both Hans and the butler, who had not expected him to take direct action. Urine tells them to watch closely. He then calls out to Agnes and says that he will try what they prepared in advance. With that, he summons the ink-sealed Phoenix. Hans asks what the object is, but Urine ignores the question and instead tells the butler to keep his eyes open and count carefully, saying that everything will be over in an instant. The butler immediately begins recording the count. Meanwhile, Hans, clearly terrified, asks about the deafening roar coming from the object in Urine's hand. Without answering, Urine throws it directly toward the approaching monsters. Sharks possess extraordinarily sharp hearing, which under normal circumstances is a tremendous advantage. However, against the sound produced by the ink whale, which resembles countless wailing insects echoing through the air, that advantage becomes a fatal weakness. The overwhelming noise drastically slows the movements of the sharkmen, known as shark cry. Taking advantage of this effect, Urine defeats them effortlessly in an instant. The ink whale continues to circle its targets, pursuing them relentlessly without pause. As the ink whale eliminates the monsters with ease, Urine laughs confidently and comments that everything is unfolding exactly as he expected. He then asks the butler whether he is counting properly. The butler confirms that he is and updates the number, announcing that it has reached 44. Urine recalls the ink whale and deliberately leaves 6 monsters behind for Aaron and Clyde to defeat as part of their training. Hearing this, Clyde becomes visibly nervous, but Aaron shows unwavering resolve and immediately moves forward to confront the remaining monsters. Still anxious, Clyde gathers his courage and decides to fight alongside Aaron rather than hesitate. While the two of them battle the monsters, Urine asks the butler whether this will at least help improve their performance record. The butler responds honestly, saying that during the evaluation, he worries that no one will believe such results if they only hear about them later. Urine smiles and tells him not to worry, pointing out that there are plenty of eyewitnesses present. The butler then congratulates Urine, saying that with this mini shark raid defeated, Urine is clearly among the leading candidates. However, he soon realizes that Urine is not listening at all and calls out his name to get his attention. Urine suddenly senses a powerful presence drawing closer and immediately warns everyone around him. He feels an oppressive aura that is far stronger than that of an ordinary orc warrior, and the sensation alone makes his instincts scream in alarm. Moments later, a massive shark-like monster rises from the ocean, its enormous body breaking through the surface as water crashes down around it. As it fully emerges, tattoos resembling royal markings can be seen etched across its arms, and in its grasp is a massive weapon that looks as though it was carved from bone. Hans is struck with sheer terror at the sight of it, overwhelmed by its size and monstrous appearance, because he has never encountered anything like it in his life. The butler suddenly recalls an ancient record he once read in the Rex family archives. He remembers a description of a monster with a body exceeding 4 meters, marked with the king's tattoos, and wielding a sword forged from the spine of a gigantic beast. He realizes that this description can only refer to the legendary Shark Ride King. The creature towers at 4.5 meters tall, possessing an overwhelming physique and the ability to manipulate aura itself. Its affinity is -100, and its hostility is clearly focused on Urine alone. The butler notices that the monster's gaze is locked directly onto them, filled with killing intent. Understanding the danger, Urine urgently orders everyone to retreat as far away from him as possible. However, before he can finish speaking, the monster launches forward. Its attack comes instantly, aimed straight at Urine and the fortress wall behind him. A massive cloud of dust erupts as the blow lands, and the monster realizes that Urine barely managed to evade the strike at the last possible moment. Urine is stunned when he sees that the fortress wall has been shattered by a single attack. He immediately lands on the shoreline, deliberately drawing the monster away from the wall and into open terrain. The creature pursues him without hesitation, moving at a speed that shocks even Urine. As another attack narrowly misses him, Urine summons the ink whale once more while continuing to evade. This time, however, the ink whale fails to affect the monster's weapon at all. Urine is left in disbelief, unable to understand why the bone blade is so incredibly durable and resistant. As the monster prepares another strike, the pressure intensifies, and Urine feels growing frustration as he realizes this battle will be far more difficult than anticipated. He quickly retreats again, narrowly avoiding the incoming blow. Without hesitation, Urine activates a spell he has only recently mastered and lunges forward, slashing at the creature with his dagger. The strike lands cleanly, and he immediately follows up with the serpent spear technique in an attempt to restrain the monster's movements. To his shock, the spell fails completely. The monster breaks free as though nothing happened and retaliates by swinging its massive bone blade toward him. Urine can hardly believe that the technique dispersed almost instantly. Acting purely on instinct, he dodges again and creates distance between himself and the creature. Frustration builds as he realizes the monster's resistance far exceeds his expectations, rendering his poison techniques nearly useless. Acknowledging that conventional methods will not work, Urine decides that it is finally time to test his new weapon. The scene shifts back to a week earlier, when Urine visited his blacksmith, Jirinox. Urine had asked whether Jirinox could forge weapons based on a particular design he brought with him. Surprised, Jirinox examined the blueprint and asked if Urine had drawn it himself. Jirinox explained that the weapon was anything but simple, describing the designs as terrifyingly complex daggers rather than ordinary blades. Urine silently reflects that in the eastern lands, such weapons are known as concealed weapons. Jirinox then asks when Urine needs them completed. Urine calmly responds that there is no urgent deadline and that Jirinox can take his time. However, Jirinox suddenly remembers that young Master Urine is scheduled to deploy in just a few days. With determination, he declares that he will work through the night if necessary to finish the weapons before Urine leaves. Urine responds with clear satisfaction, stating that this arrangement would be perfect. Returning to the present, Urine reflects that these weapons were prepared specifically for monsters like Envy, beings that someone like Agnes, who can only assume a single form, could never truly comprehend. These are the Tang Clan's 12 concealed weapons, also known as the 12 Zodiac Daggers. Without wasting a moment, Urine launches his attack. Each concealed weapon possesses both direct and curved trajectory traits, granting them properties similar to guided weapons. Perfectly forged, the daggers slip through tiny gaps in the monster's defenses, striking its weak points with deadly precision. Every dagger lands successfully. The monster is unable to dodge even one of them. Seeing that his plan is working, Urine finally feels a sense of relief. That relief vanishes instantly when the monster suddenly releases its aura at full force. Urine is stunned by the sheer resilience of the creature. As it charges forward again and swings its weapon, Urine narrowly avoids the attack. He is convinced that the battle should already be over. The monster's movements have clearly slowed, and each of the 12 daggers carries a different poison, substances no living being should be able to resist regardless of physical toughness. Yet the creature continues advancing, striking again and again as Urine continues to evade. Eventually, the monster drops to one knee, sending shock through everyone watching. Urine does not hesitate. He delivers a single decisive strike and finally brings down the boss monster Agnans. After the battle concludes, Urine receives a reward in the form of a strange bead. As he picks it up, a voice announces that he has obtained a fragment of the shattered world. Urine is stunned when he realizes that he is no longer standing on the shore and cannot comprehend where he has been transported. The bead guides him toward a massive wall, and Urine recognizes the split structure standing before him. The bead begins to glow and a notification appears, stating that he has contributed to the restoration of the world. Still reeling from the revelation, another window appears, informing him that his aptitude has been analyzed and that rewards will be distributed. Suddenly, a woman's voice announces that the reward selection has been completed and that death is approaching him. Urine freezes in shock at those words. In the next instant, Urine finds himself standing in the middle of a dense forest. Completely confused by the sudden change, he struggles to understand what is happening. Before he can organize his thoughts, a figure appears in front of him, identical to himself. Urine cannot comprehend the situation at all, and at that moment, his doppelganger calmly states that everything has finally begun. As Urine looks up, a majestic mythical creature appears high in the sky. He immediately recognizes what it is and feels his breath catch. It is a Kulin. Stunned and deeply unsettled, Urine wonders how such a being could possibly exist. He reflects on how he has always admired mythical creatures from both Eastern and Western legends. In the past, he even sketched several designs inspired by such beings, yet he clearly remembers never writing anything like this into the novel he created. The sight before him feels unreal, as though reality itself is slipping out of place. Without warning, Urine's doppelganger performs a weapon summoning using Agnes. Urine is taken aback and questions internally whether his double truly intends to fight a divine beast head-on. Anxiety rises as he wonders what kind of weapon could possibly be summoned to face something so overwhelming. To his absolute shock, what appears is an umbrella. Before Urine can fully process what he is seeing, the divine beast Iglin launches an attack, unleashing powerful lightning magic toward the doppelganger. In response, the doppelganger opens the umbrella and drives it firmly into the ground. The lightning strike is completely blocked. Urine quickly realizes that the umbrella is functioning as a lightning rod, absorbing the lightning and safely grounding it into the earth. He is stunned by the ingenuity of the idea and thinks to himself that the concept is nothing short of brilliant. With this method, lightning-based attacks are rendered entirely useless. Immediately after, the doppelganger pulls out a dagger, and Yuren recognizes it at once. Without hesitation, the doppelganger throws the dagger toward the divine beast, striking it down with a single decisive blow. Yuren can hardly believe what he is witnessing. However, the wounded divine beast rises again, gathers its mana and releases a blinding burst of light that envelops its entire body. Startled, both Yuren and his doppelganger shield their eyes from the radiance. When Yuren opens his eyes again, he is shocked to see the divine beast charging forward and ramming into the doppelganger with its antlers. At that precise moment, Yuren hears a voice announce that the playback is complete and that the Eye of the Future, which reveals death, has ended. In an instant, Yuren is pulled back into the present. The guard and the butler rush toward him, urgently asking whether he has been injured anywhere. Yuren responds calmly that he is unharmed. Hans comments that it was unbelievable for Yuren to defeat such a terrifying monster, while the butler expresses his shock at just how enormous the creature truly was. Yuren then asks Peru whether he disappeared for a moment. Peru replies in confusion that young Master Yuren had been fighting the boss monster right up until now. Hearing this, Yuren acknowledges that he understands. Peru then points out that Clyde and Aaron are nearly finished with their assignments as well. He praises Yuren, saying that he truly commands exceptional knights and that his ability to recognize talent is outstanding. Hans suggests that everyone should return and rest for the time being. As they leave the battlefield, Yuren reflects silently that the vision he experienced was something only he had seen. Knowing about his future death feels like an incredibly disturbing reward. Still, he reasons that at least he can prepare himself if he ever encounters Achillean again. Even so, unanswered questions linger. He wonders what that white room truly was, and what meaning lay behind that strange gap. Doubt begins to creep in as he questions whether this world is really the same novel he once wrote. After that incident, 3 days pass with nothing more than minor skirmishes. 1 week later, everyone gathers at the Marquis family's assembly point at Hyrule Port. The Marquis thanks everyone for returning alive and unharmed, praising their efforts during the campaign. Yuren responds modestly, but he adds that the Marquis himself took on the most difficult position. The Marquis smiles and replies that such responsibility is simply part of his duty. He then reminds everyone that this campaign was the first test to determine the successor and announces that the evaluation will begin immediately. He starts with the youngest son, Ron. The butler steps forward and reports that Lord Round was responsible for the southern wall and defended it perfectly. Round's soldiers erupt into loud cheers. The butler continues, stating that Round defeated 180-54 Bolak, 467 Mantar, and 341 Karen along with 22 higher-ranked monsters known as Sharkry. Based on the traditional scoring system recorded in the Marquis family archives, Bolak are worth 1 point each, Mantar 3 points, Karn 5 points, and Sharkrai 30 points each. The Marquis expresses surprise upon hearing that Ron defeated Sharkrai as well. Round's total score is announced as 560-20 points, prompting his soldiers to cheer once more. The Marquis praises Ron for his efforts. Next, Callan's evaluation begins. The butler reports that Lord Callan also defended his wall perfectly. Callan's defeated monsters include Bolak, Mantar, and Cairn along with 35 Sharkrai, resulting in a total score of 73 and 54 points. Callan's soldiers cheer enthusiastically, and the Marquis remarks that this is an impressive result, noting that Callan defeated even more monsters than the Marquis himself. Callan reacts with a smug expression. Finally, Yuren's evaluation begins. The butler reports that the wall under Yuren's command was destroyed. Upon hearing this, Callan bursts into laughter, while Round tells him to stop. Yuren thinks to himself that Callan clearly has not learned his lesson yet. The butler then continues, stating that Yuren defeated 332 Bolak, 281 Mantar, and 197 Cairn, along with an astonishing 169 Sharkrai. Shock spreads through the crowd as the final score is announced. Yuren's total score is revealed to be 230 points. According to the report, Yuren slew 169 Sharkrai during the trial. The number alone makes the gathered knights trade uneasy looks, and Colin, plainly bewildered, immediately questions how that could possibly be true. He wonders how Yuren could have defeated so many monsters with only a small group at his side, because the scale of it sounds absurd. The butler calmly clears his throat and says that there is, in fact, one correction to the announcement. Hearing that, Colin lets out a breath of relief and says that he knew something had to be wrong. There is no way Yuren could have wiped out that many creatures, so there must have been some exaggeration in the report. But the butler's next words only drive the shock deeper. He explains that besides the 169 Sharkrai, Yuren also killed a Sharkrai king at the end of the battle. According to the official record, a Sharkrai king is worth 10,000 points, and with that added, Yuren's final total reaches 2,030 points. The room falls silent. Colin is struck dumb for a moment before he finally bursts out that it has to be a lie. He directly challenges the butler and insists that such a feat is impossible. He says that even defeating more than 1,000 Sharkrai would be hard to accept, so there is no way one person could accomplish something like this. The butler answers without agitation and says that he too found the report hard to believe at first. That is exactly why he prepared evidence. With a small gesture from him, attendants carry forward the remains of the Sharkrai king. The knights gasp at the sight. For many of them, it is their first time seeing such a monster up close, and its sheer scale leaves no room for doubt. The beast is at least 3 times larger than an ordinary sharkrai, and its massive body makes the claim impossible to dismiss. The butler then reveals another piece of proof, the giant bone sword the sharkrai king used. He respectfully addresses the Marquis and points out that the records describe sharkrai as monsters over 3 meters long, while their king is said to wield a distinctive bone blade exactly like the one before them. The Marquis nods, because of course he knows those records well. The butler adds that he has already sent the remains to the estate for preservation and study in case they prove strategically valuable. Once they are examined in full, no one will be able to question the truth. The Marquis raises a hand and stops him there. He says there is no need to go that far. They have known each other for years, and he trusts the butler's judgment. Philo then steps forward and offers further explanation. He says that the Sharkrai King destroyed part of the defensive wall with a single leap, and if young Master Urin had not stepped in and killed it at that exact moment, the forces stationed there would have been in grave danger. Colin still cannot properly process what he is hearing. The Marquis turns to Urin and asks whether he used the special ability he had shown before. Urin answers calmly that he did. The Marquis looks impressed and remarks that even imagining what might have happened without Urin there is unsettling. The result could have been catastrophic. Urin modestly says that the Marquis is praising him too much and that he only did what had to be done. Then, in a sudden twist, Urin walks over to Colin and asks what he should call him now. Colin hesitates briefly before reluctantly addressing him as his great older brother. Yet Urin responds in an unexpected way. He says that, honestly, the 10,000 points for the Sharkrai King feel excessive. In his view, that battle was not especially difficult, so he suggests counting it as only 1 point instead. Colin stares at him in total confusion. Urin continues and explains that even if the Sharkrai King is reduced to a single point, he would still have roughly 8,000 points, while Colin only has 7,000. As Colin's older brother, he says that he had actually hoped Colin would win, but unfortunately it did not turn out that way. With a faint smile, he adds that it feels as though he cleared the first test far too easily. That only makes Colin more irritated. Hearing Urin dismiss such an overwhelming achievement so casually grates on him even more. Urin then says calmly that he hopes the second test will be closer, something more competitive and enjoyable. With a light smile, he tells Colin that he should try harder next time. At that moment, the Marquis steps in and nods in agreement. He says that Urin is right, because this expedition was only the first test. In truth, it was more than a simple evaluation. He explains that his real purpose was to let his sons gain genuine battlefield experience. As the ruler of rocks, he must command forces against endless waves of monsters year after year. The title of Marquis may look dazzling from the outside, wrapped in honor and prestige, but the truth is nothing like that. Behind the glory lies crushing responsibility. Defending the territory, protecting the people, and preparing for constant threats is no easy burden. After saying this, the Marquis turns and announces that they will discuss the trial's results further once they return home. For now, there is still one final duty to carry out. Before it grows too late, he orders everyone to board the ship waiting behind him. The vessel is no ordinary ship. It has been enchanted with advanced stealth magic, allowing it to pass through nearby seas without alerting marine monsters. Their final task is to inspect the surrounding waters while sailing along the coast. As the group boards, Peru looks around in amazement, clearly impressed by the ship's design and craftsmanship. He also notices several mages stationed on the deck. Since the vessel runs through magical enchantments, it makes perfect sense that skilled magic users are aboard to maintain its functions. While observing the Water Dragon Knight order on the ship, Urin suddenly spots a familiar face among them. It is Reka Aloan. The moment their eyes nearly meet, Urin senses unmistakable killing intent coming from him. The hostility is sharp and direct. Urin deliberately avoids staring for too long, immediately recognizing that Reka's feelings toward him are anything but friendly. Not long after departure, the Marquis calls Urin, Kalin, and Rayon over. He begins explaining the geography of the region and emphasizes that understanding the terrain and nearby islands will be useful to them in the future. Pointing toward a distant landmass, he identifies it as Polian Island, a place known to be inhabited by many mantas. As they sail, he continues describing trade routes, monster territories, and strategically important locations in detail. Watching the scene, Urin cannot help but remark that it almost looks like a father taking his sons on a journey. He then turns to Erin and casually asks whether she gets seasick. Erin replies that she rarely does. Arya, who is standing nearby, also speaks up. She says that only a few months ago, she never would have imagined herself standing here like this, traveling beside Urin on such an expedition. Hearing that, Urin smiles softly. Arya sincerely thanks him for giving her the chance to become a knight. She explains that in recent days, she has learned so much, not only about fighting, but also about what true happiness feels like. Urin answers modestly and says that if that is how she feels, then that alone makes it rewarding for him as well. But the calm mood does not last. Without warning, the ship lurches violently. The Marquis looks around in confusion and asks what is happening. It feels as though they have struck something beneath the surface. Then a massive creature explodes out of the sea. Urin's eyes widen in shock. It is a sea serpent. The enormous monster releases a deafening roar and spews a thick mist toward the ship. The fog rapidly spreads across the deck, and one after another, the knights begin to weaken and collapse, including the Marquis himself. Amid the chaos, Yurin alone remains standing. A notification appears before him, informing him that sea serpent mist poison has been absorbed and that his skill level has reached the 5th star. While everyone else succumbs to the venomous fog, Yurin only grows stronger. As the poisonous mist spreads across the deck, he instantly grasps the situation. Without a moment of hesitation, he activates his newly strengthened poison absorption. A faint energy gathers around him as he starts drawing the toxic mist into himself rather than resisting it. At the same time, the sea serpent lets out a low roar, then unexpectedly turns and plunges back into the ocean. But the danger is far from over. Across the ship, knights and mages continue collapsing, overwhelmed by the lingering poison. Even the Marquis struggles to stay conscious. As he watches his men fall, regret grips him. He wonders whether this is how everything ends, all because of a single mistake at sea. Just as despair begins to settle in, Yurin steps forward. He approaches the Marquis and calmly tells him not to worry, because there is no need for despair. Barely able to move, the Marquis is confused. He cannot understand how Yurin is still standing or why he remains unaffected. Before he can even finish asking, Yurin releases his enhanced technique. In an instant, the surrounding poison is absorbed into him and neutralized. The Marquis feels the weakness leave his body almost immediately, and his strength returns as though nothing had happened. Without wasting time, Yurin tells him that he will go treat the others. They have no idea when the sea serpent may resurface, so defenses must be prepared at once. He asks the Marquis to organize the defensive formation while he handles the recovery. As Yurin continues absorbing the toxic mist, notifications appear before him. His poison absorption proficiency rises, along with several related techniques. Internally, he realizes that this situation is almost like a jackpot. Every person poisoned by the mist becomes another chance for growth. By purifying the venom, he is effectively gaining valuable experience. He quickly moves to one of the fallen mages and begins treating him. The mage weakly protests and says that Yurin should stop saying foolish things, because this is not a toxin that ordinary detoxification magic can remove. Yet before he can continue, the poison vanishes from his body. The mage sits up in shock, completely healed, and stares at Yurin in disbelief. Not only has young Master Yurin neutralized the poison instantly, but he has done so with a mastery far beyond normal magical ability. Yurin tells him to regroup with the other mages and prepare the ship's magic barrier. The stunned mage nods and rushes off to do exactly that. The focus then shifts to Reika, the knight who harbors hostility toward Yurin. As he fights against the poison, dark thoughts flood his mind. He cannot die here, not after everything he has endured. He worked relentlessly to earn his promotion so that he could support his mother and younger siblings. Just as his strength begins to fade completely, Yurin appears beside him. With a simple activation of his technique, the poison is absorbed and dispersed. Reika feels the pain disappear almost instantly. Startled, he realizes he has been fully healed. Yurin speaks firmly and says that if Reika has recovered his senses, he must immediately prepare the archers. If the sea serpent returns, ranged attacks will be essential, and Reika's role is important. Reika hesitates for only a brief moment before replying that he understands. Next, Yurin goes to his brothers, Rayon and Callan. He heals Rayon efficiently, then walks straight past Callan without stopping. Callan panics and hurriedly calls out, addressing him as his great older brother and asking to be healed too. Yurin turns back with a slight smile and says that of course he will take care of his little brother as well. Moments later, the sea churns once again. The sea serpent resurfaces. The Marquis immediately orders everyone into defensive formation. The creature had clearly expected the crew to remain incapacitated, yet instead it finds a fully prepared force waiting for it. Enraged, the sea serpent releases another wave of poisonous mist. This time, however, the fog slams into the fully activated magic barrier and scatters harmlessly. The Marquis declares that they may have been caught off guard once, but they will not repeat the same mistake. Reika, now steady and focused, commands the archers to fire immediately. A volley of arrows rains into the sea serpent, forcing it to recoil. Shocked, the gigantic creature dives beneath the waves once more. The Marquis watches the water carefully and wonders whether it has retreated again. Yurin shakes his head and says that it has not. The sea serpent is circling below, looking for another opening. Standing firm at the center of the deck, Yurin raises his voice and tells everyone to stay alert, because the creature will surface again soon. Then he activates another technique, Flower Butterfly. A luminous butterfly-shaped aura drifts gently across the ocean's surface. Yurin calmly explains that the sea serpent will rise directly beneath the place where the butterfly lands. As though drawn by instinct, the sea serpent bursts upward from the exact point beneath the glowing butterfly. But the instant the butterfly touches its body, a violent explosion erupts. The enormous serpent crashes back into the sea. The crew can only stare in disbelief as the terrifying sea serpent is defeated, and as its massive body sinks beneath the water, Yurin notices something familiar emerging from the aftermath. In the very next moment, the aura begins to shine with an intense and radiant light, flooding the surroundings with a mysterious energy. A calm yet commanding voice resounds and tells Yurin that he has obtained a fragment of a shattered world. In the next instant, he is pulled into a familiar place, a vast white room with no end in sight. The moment he looks around, he realizes that it is the same empty space he had encountered before. As his gaze sweeps across the room, it is drawn once more to the glowing orb floating nearby. Curious and slightly unsettled, Yurin calls out to Agnes and asks whether he can see the same thing. To his shock, no answer comes back. The connection has been completely severed, leaving him utterly alone in that strange dimension. Before he can make sense of it, the orb suddenly shoots forward and smashes into the wall, cracking it apart. At that very moment, the mysterious voice speaks again and announces that Yurin has contributed to the restoration of the world, and that he has been granted a reward for doing so. That reward is revealed to be a special trait called Soul Sword. Yurin is left stunned, unable to fully grasp what kind of power he has just received. Then, without warning, he is thrown back into reality and returns to the boat where the battle had taken place. The air on deck is filled with amazement as everyone sees that Yurin truly defeated the sea serpent. The Marquis openly praises him and says that his abilities are remarkable. Yurin, staying humble, brushes it off and says that it was nothing extraordinary. The Marquis then remarks that sea serpents are not supposed to appear in the southern waters, which suggests that something abnormal may be happening. Yurin steps forward confidently and says that a monster like that poses no real danger to their forces. The Marquis agrees, then makes a bold declaration. He says that from this day onward, Yurin will shoulder the duty of protecting the safety and peace of their people. The words leave everyone present visibly shaken. A little later, Peru approaches Yurin and asks whether the Marquis truly said those words. Yurin confirms that he did. Peru then explains that such a statement strongly implies the Marquis may be considering Yurin as his successor. Yurin immediately denies it and insists that it cannot be true, especially when he is still known as a troublemaker. But Peru urges him to look around at the soldiers. When Yurin does, he notices that their expressions have completely changed. Their eyes, once uncertain, are now filled with respect and admiration. To his surprise, he also sees that Rika's affinity has suddenly risen all the way to 53. Frustrated and slightly overwhelmed, Yurin tells Peru to stop speaking nonsense and reminds him that their trials are not over yet. Eventually, the expedition comes to an end. Yet from that day onward, the Marquis never brings up the trial again, which leaves Yurin with lingering doubts. Later, alone in his room, Yurin stands before a mirror and activates the Creator's Eye to inspect his current condition. He carefully studies his abilities, his stats, and especially the new trait, Soul Sword. As he examines it, he realizes that it is displayed in percentages, which tells him that it is far more complicated than an ordinary knight's trait. That only deepens his curiosity, especially when he notices that several parts of it are covered in question marks. He begins wondering whether his synchronization has changed and what those hidden sections could possibly mean. While he is still trying to sort through it, Peru enters the room and says that the Marquis is calling for him. Slightly surprised, Yurin answers that he will go right away. A short while later, he arrives before the Marquis and politely asks whether he wished to see him. Without much explanation, the Marquis hands him a book, making it clear that something important is about to begin. Looking down at it in confusion, Yurin asks what the book is for. The Marquis calmly explains that it is an annual manual on Crisis Kingdom classical swordsmanship. He goes on to say that he wants Yurin to start learning how to use a sword. After thinking things over carefully, he has realized something important. From now on, Yurin will inevitably find himself clashing with knights in battle. Hearing that, Yurin comes to understand more clearly that this world is ruled not only by magic, but by the sword as well. The Marquis continues and says that even if Yurin has no desire to become a swordsman, he still must understand the basics. In crucial moments, those fundamentals may decide whether he lives or dies, wins or loses. He explains that the manual contains the essential foundations of swordsmanship. He tells Yurin to read it thoroughly, then go to the training grounds and observe how real knights use those techniques in practice. Reassuring him, the Marquis says that such knowledge will be vital when he eventually faces skilled opponents. Yurin nods and says that he understands. Deep down, however, he realizes that the Marquis is sincerely worried for his safety, which makes it difficult to refuse. Even so, Yurin still has almost no personal interest in swordsmanship. After leaving the room, he casually flips through the manual. He quickly notices that the illustrations are unusually detailed and surprisingly easy to understand. As he keeps reading, something suddenly catches his attention and makes him focus in earnest. A few minutes later, the Marquis steps out of his room and is startled to see Yurin sitting on the floor, completely absorbed in the book. Confused, he asks what Yurin is doing. Yurin looks up with unexpected excitement and asks whether there are more books like this. Slightly taken aback by the sudden shift in attitude, the Marquis says that he will check and see what else can be found. The scene then moves to later that same night. In Yurin's room, surrounded by several books the Marquis provided, Yurin is fully engrossed in reading. One of the books covers Crisis Kingdom classical swordsmanship, specifically Chapter 5, Dragonclaw Stance, Modification 1. At that exact moment, a system window appears and states that the Martial God's body trait allows Yurin to replicate Dragonclaw Stance, Modification 1. Yurin is thrilled. He can hardly believe that by simply reading, he is able to learn and reproduce advanced sword techniques. He immediately realizes how extraordinary that ability is. With a trait like this, he could potentially master the entire Crisis Kingdom sword style in a single day. As the night stretches on, Yurin continues reading through the manuals one after another. Eventually, another notification appears and informs him that he has successfully mastered the fundamentals of Crisis Kingdom classical swordsmanship. At the same time, his soul sword trait rises by 10%. Seeing that, Yurin realizes that the swordsmanship knowledge is being stored inside the soul sword itself, which only makes the trait even more mysterious. Wanting to test it, he calls out to Agnes and asks him to create a sword. Agnes grumbles irritably about being woken so late and remarks that he is not even especially skilled with swords. Even so, he summons a blade into Yurin's hand. The moment Yurin grips it, something astonishing happens. He performs the basic techniques he had only just read about with complete precision, as though he had practiced them for years. Agnes watches in visible surprise and immediately asks how Yurin managed to do that so effortlessly. The next day, Yurin is seen sitting quietly in the library, fully buried in swordsmanship books. By then, he has already worked through nearly every manual he can find, studying each one carefully in the hope of pushing his abilities further. Determined to test his theory, he opens another text, Walkerbilm's Swordsmanship Manual, Chapter 1. As he begins reading, a system window appears and informs him that his soul sword trait has increased by only 0.1%. Yurin pauses, clearly surprised by how tiny the increase is. Compared to the huge gains he received from studying the Crisis Kingdom style, that improvement is almost nothing. As he continues experimenting with other books, he sees the same pattern repeat again and again. Each text gives him only the slightest increase, making the process feel inefficient and wasteful. At that point, Yurin arrives at an important conclusion. The effectiveness of what he learns does not depend only on the content, but also on the person who wrote it. Once he understands that, he realizes that he needs more works by the same author who wrote the Crisis Kingdom Swordsmanship Manual. With that in mind, he goes to the librarian and asks whether there are any manuals written by someone named Cabal. The librarian looks puzzled and admits that the name does not sound familiar, but he agrees to search through the collection. After digging through many old records and books, the librarian eventually returns with a single volume. He says that he managed to find one book written by someone with that name. Yurin takes a closer look and sees that its title is The Basics of Level Swordsmanship. The librarian adds that Level was once a kingdom, but it no longer exists, having fallen hundreds of years ago. Intrigued, Yurin thanks him and immediately starts reading. The moment he opens the first page, something incredible happens. His stats begin increasing at once. Realizing the book's value, Yurin wastes no time and continues reading all 18 chapters with complete concentration. As he progresses, system notifications appear one after another, each confirming that his soul sword trait is steadily increasing. At the same time, another ability, Emperor's Forgotten Imperial Swordsmanship, also begins to rise. By the time he finishes the book, his soul sword has increased by a tremendous 15%. Yurin is left stunned by the sheer scale of the improvement. The next day, he seeks out the Marquis and explains everything he has learned about these swordsmanship manuals. After listening carefully, the Marquis says that he is familiar with Frockin swordsmanship, but the name Cabal means nothing to him. Curious, Yurin asks where the Marquis found those manuals in the first place. The Marquis casually replies that he discovered them in the library. He jokingly admits that he had been avoiding his duties and wandered in there instead, where he stumbled upon a number of extremely old books, some dating back to his grandfather's time or even earlier. Then he changes the topic and reminds Yurin that a feast is approaching. He insists that Yurin must attend because they cannot properly celebrate without the hero of the expedition present. Yurin shows no enthusiasm, however. Instead, he quietly excuses himself by saying that he is not feeling well, then leaves. As he walks away, he reflects on everything he has uncovered and concludes that only one person may still be able to answer his questions. Later that day, he heads into the garden and approaches the old gardener, politely asking whether he has a moment to talk. The two sit down together, and the old man offers him tea. With a gentle smile, the gardener tells Yurin to stop being so formal. Yurin calmly replies that he cannot do that, and asks how he could ever treat his own grandfather so casually. The old man is visibly shaken by those words. His expression changes, and with a hint of pressure in his voice, he asks whether Chillington told Yurin the truth. Yurin shakes his head and explains that no one told him anything. He figured it out for himself. Hearing that, the old man falls silent for a moment before admitting that Yurin's awareness caught him completely off guard. More than that, he points out that Yurin showed no reaction at all to his overwhelming aura, something that would unsettle almost anyone. With a thoughtful look, the old man finally acknowledges the truth. He says that Yurin has truly changed. After pausing briefly, he reflects on their earlier meeting and suggests that perhaps Yurin had already guessed his identity even back then. Yurin calmly says that his grandfather always stood out, so he merely gathered enough information to connect the pieces. In truth, however, Yurin had relied on the Creator's Eye, which revealed everything clearly. The old gardener standing before him is none other than Udiai, the strongest swordsman, a man whose level is far beyond anything ordinary. Curious, Yurin asks why someone like Udiai would choose to live as a mere gardener. He also asks whether his father ever tried to stop him. Udiai lets out a quiet sigh and explains that becoming a gardener was his own decision. He says that he had grown tired of everything and chose to step away from his previous life. Although Yurin's father did try to persuade him, Udiai admits that once he makes up his mind, he has always been too stubborn to change it. Yurin then brings up what he had heard before, that ODI disappeared without a trace years ago. In response, ODI begins speaking about his past. He explains that he once served in the Imperial Army. In House Rocks, the eldest son inherits everything regardless of talent or merit. No matter how hard ODI tried, the position of Marquis was always destined to go to his older brother. Accepting that reality, he left home and chose to carve out his own path. During his travels, he eventually offered his loyalty to the Empire and joined its army. At that time, the Empire was locked in a brutal war with the Kingdom of Merrill. It was on those battlefields that ODI forged his reputation and climbed through the ranks. Driven by ambition, he aimed to earn the title of Imperial Marquis and return home one day in glory. Years later, the Empire finally defeated the Kingdom of Merrill. But after that victory, ODI found himself reflecting on everything he had done. In that moment, a cruel truth struck him. Many of the people he had killed were not villains driven by evil, but ordinary individuals swept into a war born from the clash between nations. By the time he came to that realization, it was already too late to undo what had happened. Unable to bear the weight of those sins, ODI abandoned everything. He turned his back on the Empire, his ambitions, and the life he had built, then returned home in silence, leaving behind the identity he had fought so hard to obtain. With a faint and bitter smile, ODI remarks that it is hardly some grand heroic tale. He adds that he never even told Willington about it, yet for some reason he found himself sharing it with Yurin without hesitation. Yurin listens carefully and answers with sincerity. He says that it must have been unbearably difficult to carry such a burden for so many years, and he thanks ODI for trusting him enough to reveal the truth. ODI studies Yurin for a moment, then admits that he is nothing like the rumors claim. Shifting the conversation, he asks directly whether Yurin needs something from him. Yurin nods and asks whether he knows a man named Cabal. ODI immediately says that he does. Yurin then hands him the book and explains that Cabal is the author. The moment ODI sees the volume, he recognizes it and casually says that it appears to be one of the books he once left in the library. Surprised, Yurin quickly asks where he got it in the first place. ODI explains that one day, when he returned home, there was a young boy waiting at the gate. That child had asked him to buy several books. Although ODI did not fully understand why, the boy seemed desperate enough that he decided to buy them all for him. Hearing that, Yurin leans in and asks whether ODI remembers anything else about the child. After thinking for a moment, ODI says that the boy had black hair and looked to be around Yurin's age at the time. That detail instantly catches Yurin's attention. In this medieval fantasy world, black hair is extremely rare. Among all the characters he himself once created with that trait, only a handful could possibly fit. Yurin begins to suspect that the boy may have hidden his natural hair color as he grew older. As that possibility slowly takes shape in his mind, he falls deep into thought, wondering whether the mysterious child from the past could be the very person he is now starting to suspect. Under the dark sky above the estate, he lets out a tired breath and picks up the book in front of him. As he studies the forgotten Imperial sword, he reflects that he had designed it as an incomplete style, so he cannot understand why this world seems to have completed it on its own. Even though he finds that interesting, he quickly decides that the bigger problem is figuring out where he is supposed to find the rest of Cabal's books. A glowing panel appears before him, and he brushes the Imperial sword issue aside. He thinks that what he really needs right now is not that sword style at all, but the level unknown Rain of 10,000 Flowers, the ultimate throwing technique known as Rain of Flowers filling the sky. That thought makes him remember the 4-star Heavenly 10,000 Poisons technique tied to that skill, and he realizes he still has not checked what poisons came with it. Another window opens and shows Bone Melter, a poison capable of dissolving even the souls of the dead, and one that can melt flesh and bone from a corpse in 5 seconds. He stares at it and thinks that this is practically a standard Miram tool for getting rid of bodies and evidence. Even so, he scratches his head and admits that he does not really need something like that, since he has no intention of playing assassin. Still, as he keeps looking at it, he wonders whether this poison can at least be counted as useful. When morning comes, he heads to the training grounds and tests his throwing technique, sending his weapon flying cleanly into the target. Before he can continue, a servant comes sprinting toward him and calls him Young Lord. He turns in confusion, and the servant hurriedly explains that the Marquis is calling for him. As the man pants and rushes him along, he complains that the order is urgent and says that he has to bring him there right away. Hearing that, he inwardly grumbles that the servant could have just walked over normally, then grows suspicious and thinks that the plot should be in a quiet phase right now, so he cannot imagine what could have happened. The servant announces that Yurin has arrived. A voice from inside orders him to enter, and the moment he steps in, he is startled to find an unexpected guest standing with the Marquis. He immediately recognizes Karox Livingtane and recalls that he is Lady Kyna's brother and the captain of the Night Order. At the same time, he coolly notes to himself that although Karox is trying to poison him, the man is really just handing him an endless supply of poison without even realizing it. The Marquis then reveals why he called him in so suddenly. In a grave tone, he says that the Marquisate has received an urgent request for reinforcements, then explains that the outer northern wall defended by House Elion was breached yesterday. That news makes his eyes sharpen at once. He thinks that monster activity in the north always rises at this time of year, but the protagonist should have been there protecting the wall. Frustration immediately rises in him, and he inwardly curses that bastard for slacking off again while wondering what the hell he is even doing. After a long breath, the Marquis says that he has thought it over and made a decision. He then declares that he is placing him in command of the Night Order and orders him to head north. He's caught off guard, but before he can fully react, he quickly adds that the monsters appearing this time are different. That earns immediate attention. The explanation follows that the creatures attacking from the north are like beings that cannot die. When the truth is finally stated, the answer hits him hard. The monsters are the living dead. As that realization settles in, a purple system window begins to appear before his eyes. Yuren stares at the status window, realizes that this is exactly what he needs, and reads through Bone Melter's description. He notes that it is a poison meant for corpses, one that can melt flesh and bone in seconds, and immediately thinks that the timing could not be more perfect. With sudden confidence, he tells his father not to worry, then grins and says that he will return in glory and bring great prestige to House Rocks. His father and the white-haired knight can only react stiffly, clearly unsure what to make of that sudden burst of spirit. 2 days later, the troops gather to depart. As Yuren arrives, the soldiers tell him that everyone has been waiting for him. He is surprised to see Colin there as well and asks why he is coming when he thought he would be heading back to the capital. Colin awkwardly explains that he wants more real combat experience and says that it is better than rotting away at the academy. When Colin adds that, if Yuren does not mind, he wants to go with him. Yuren hesitates, then inwardly concludes that Colin must have become a little humbler after having his life saved. Their father steps forward and announces that they are ready to move out. Yuren answers at once, but the Marquis suddenly calls his name again and, in a grave voice, says that he is entrusting him with Colin's life and the lives of every soldier present. Yuren is visibly taken aback by the weight of that responsibility and admits to himself that it is a tremendous amount of pressure. The Marquis does not leave him time to dwell on it, however, and sharply orders the transfer to begin at once. A brilliant magical light erupts around them, and in the next instant the entire group is transported north. When the glare fades, Yuren looks around the unfamiliar military camp and remarks in surprise that they have already arrived. The camp is tense, filled with soldiers in tents pressed close to the fortress walls. A knight comes to meet them and welcomes the reinforcements. He introduces himself as Kyle Elion, the first son of House Elion. Yuren returns the greeting and gives his own name, but Kyle suddenly bursts into laughter. With a casual, almost amused attitude, Kyle says that he had been wondering who they would send, and then remarks that the one who came is the very person who put his younger brother Garrick in his place. Yuren awkwardly tries to respond, stumbling a little, while Kyle laughs it off and says that this sort of thing can happen after a spar. Then, turning on his heel, Kyle says that he will take Yuren to the Duke, and Yuren can only follow with a hesitant reply. Inside the command tent, the ruler of the fortress laughs heartily the moment he sees Yuren. He says that, so this is the one everyone has been speaking about, then recognizes him as the slayer of the Sharkrai King and warmly thanks him for coming to their aid. Yuren lowers his head and says that he is flattered, then assures the Duke that he will do everything in his power to help. After that, he asks when they are supposed to depart. The Duke answers that they will move tomorrow at dawn. But the Duke's face soon darkens. He grimly explains that even with reinforcements, he can only hope they will be able to reclaim the wall. Before the discussion can go any further, a cry of alarm suddenly rings out from outside. Kyle whirls around in shock and exclaims that the enemy is already attacking. Everyone rushes out at once. Under the dark sky beyond the fortress, an endless mass of walking corpses surges forward. The Duke stares in horror and says that there are far too many of them, like a sea of endless walking dead. Then an even more terrifying figure appears among them. Someone recognizes the rider wrapped in blue deathly flames and says that it is the undead rider, Durian. The men around the Duke immediately begin to panic. One insists that they must fall back and prepare for a siege. Another desperately argues that they cannot do that because if the gates collapse, the whole kingdom will be doomed. In the middle of that chaos, someone suddenly notices a lone figure charging straight into the enemy camp. He cries out in disbelief and says that the man throwing blades is Yuren and that his target is Durian. Yuren has already moved. Cloak billowing behind him, he cuts through the darkness and hurls his blades with merciless precision. The weapons strike Durian directly, and the bone melter poison takes effect at once. Durian's corpse-like body begins to dissolve and melt apart in a grotesque instant, shocking everyone who sees it. A horrified voice trembles and says that Durian has melted. He can only stammer in disbelief and ask what just happened. Far away, a hooded figure watches the scene through a glowing orb. As the remains of the undead rider vanish and Yuren's image reflects inside the sphere, the observer goes still for a moment, then demands to know who the hell this man is.